The story starts like any other: the invasion of the world. One day, through an open gate, monsters from another realm poured out, and humanity faced the threat of destruction. At that very moment, connected to the gate and opened as if by salvation itself, the world of swords and magic, Einhart, appeared. Through the inner energy of the Dantian, martial arts were wielded. The martial arts world, Murim, and the land of demons, Gehenna, a name befitting hell itself, emerged. Humanity, once rulers of the earth, could only suffer in such an era of chaos. However, soon individuals awakened, harnessing the system and gaining superhuman powers. These players helped normal humans and tried their best to save them from the chaotic world. After the players saved the humans fleeing from monsters, the humans thanked them. Our protagonist, Irun, warned them that it was dangerous and they shouldn't go near the gate. He then asked his teammate why those people always started trouble whenever they saw him. One of his teammates replied that it was nothing new for intruders to disregard humans and asked what was so surprising about it. The man added that the Dantian and Mana Circle were like high-ranking powers. Suddenly they heard someone scream loudly. Irun turned to see a monster attacking a car with people inside. He immediately activated his status window, and the system identified the monster as a three-headed werewolf, an intermediate monster with 110 points. The system also issued an emergency rescue request. Irun called out to his comrades, asking what they were doing and urging them to catch the crazy dog. Without waiting for a response, he rushed toward the monster. One of his teammates shouted for him to wait, but Irun didn't listen. He jumped off the building, deploying his rope dart, piercing it into the building behind him, and swings toward the monster. His teammate shouted in frustration, asking if he was out of his mind, and reminded him that monsters above intermediate rank were supposed to be handled by the Volcano Guild. Irun replied that he knew, but pointed out that it was obvious the guild was struggling. As he neared the monster, he retracted his rope dart and forcefully threw it, successfully piercing the monster's body. This shocked the members of the Volcano Guild. Irun then opens the wings of his rope dart, activating his exclusive skill for the controller hidden class, Status Controller. This skill increased his strength by 60%, willpower and agility by 30%, but reduced his dodge rate by 60% and increased his weight by 300% due to the stat synergy effect. He forcefully dragged the monster, making it scream in pain while the victim and her child screamed in horror. Struggling to maintain his strength, he shakily called out to his teammates, urging them to hurry up and decapitate the monster. One teammate jumped down from the building, shouting at Irun for never listening and activating his tanker attack skill. He slashed his sword forward while yelling that Irun would never survive without him. Irun smiled, thinking how his teammate always protected his back like a true companion. But just as his teammate swung his sword, he slashed Irun from behind instead of the monster. Shocked, Irun heard his so-called friend angrily call him a fool and tell him to just die already. Irun collapsed, bleeding heavily. Before falling unconscious, he saw his best friend's face and his teammates smiling at his death, which filled him with fury. As he tries to flee, he recalled the woman he tried to save stood unmoved. Betrayed by everyone he trusted and relied on, he died consumed by rage. Years later, Irun fell face first into the dirt. A man kicked him repeatedly, shouting for him to move faster and calling him scum. The man mocked him, saying this was what a high-ranked, nearly top-tier player looked like. Irun knew he was in Mujayagyong, the monster corpse disposal area of the Volcano Guild, a living hell. 5 years had passed since his fall into this wretched existence. The man pinned Irun's head deeper into the mud, laughing cruelly. Struggling to look up through blurred vision, Irun found that his status window was no longer appearing. Yet, a blue light suddenly shone before him. Shocked, he opened his eyes to see the system displaying a message. He has been chosen as the vessel of chaos, and asked him if he accept. The system warned him that his choice could lead to the destruction of the world. Smiling bitterly, Irun thought about ending his pain. Without hesitation, he accepted. The system sucked him into a portal, transporting him to an unknown location. There, he encountered the legendary rulers of Gehenna, the Three Kings. What lay before his eyes were legends forgotten across the three worlds, remembered only as history. The first was the King of Silver, Mu Wang, who conquered the continent with a single fist. The second was the Sword King of Einhart, who split the sky with his sword. Lastly, there was the Godslayer, the King of Gehenna, who killed a god and destroyed divinity, the Demon King. The place Irun now stood in was the chaotic world where these three kings were sealed. The Sword King observed Irun's gaze and asked the others why it looked the way it did, questioning if he was truly the vessel of chaos. Mu Wang seemed equally confused and asked why Irun was staring into the distance instead of at them. The Demon King, however, remarked that it was understandable for someone to feel disoriented after being suddenly dragged into such a place. Meanwhile, Irun was staring at the system, which displayed an open gate, and told him that if he passed through it, he would become the vessel of chaos. However, it also warned him again that his choice could lead to the world's end. Irun wondered if he could exact revenge on the world that betrayed him and now lived on in peace. Memories of his teammates, his best friend, and the woman he loved flashed through his mind. Resolutely, he stood and approached the open gate, thinking that if revenge was possible, he would gladly accept it. The king surrounded him, accusing him of being disrespectful, but he ignored them. He only stopped when one of them asked if he believed he would truly feel relieved by taking revenge in this manner. The Sword King told him that becoming the vessel of chaos was simple. If Irun truly wished for the world's destruction, all he had to do was step through the gate, and it would happen. Irun replied that seeing it firsthand made him feel at ease. He truly did hope for the world's destruction. Yet the Sword King reminded him that if the world were destroyed, it wouldn't be Irun enacting revenge, but chaos itself. Mu Wang explained that chaos would consume his body and mind, leaving him as little more than a spectator, receiving only the message that the world had been destroyed. Irun was speechless. The Demon King then asked if that outcome was really enough for him. Was it truly the revenge he wanted? Irun, still angry and broken, asked them what they expected him to do about it. The Demon King ominously responded that Irun must carry out his revenge with his own hands. Whether through beating or tearing, only by personally enacting vengeance could he truly savor it. Frustrated, Irun angrily asked how he could even contemplate such a thing with his broken body, having lost his player powers and being branded a slave. The Sword King bristled at his defiance, demanding that Irun recognize who they were. The kings told him that if he inherited their legacies and trapped chaos within himself, he would not only achieve his revenge, but could even become the ruler of the entire world. Swearing to help him, they urged him to inherit everything from them. To Irun, the purpose behind their insistence that he become their disciple didn't matter. Revenge was all he cared about. He asked if he could call them masters. The Demon King, surprised, quickly agreed. The Sword King, however, remarked that Irun's easy persuasion was unsettling, while Mu Wang laughed awkwardly, saying it was fine. Thus, Irun became the disciple of the three kings. In the world of seals, where time and death had ceased, Irun underwent endless training. Finally, he succeeded in trapping chaos within himself. Irun awoke to someone kicking him from behind. His supervisor was shouting at him, asking if he was seriously sleeping in a dung pit. Dodging the next kick, Irun wondered if time had truly stopped during his training. He grabbed his supervisor's foot and easily threw him, sending the man flying and screaming. As his supervisor slammed into the mud, Irun looked for his status window. As expected, it did not appear. He noticed his body was unchanged, having lost his player powers. Without his master's words, he might have believed the past 100 years of training were nothing but a dream. He recalled Mu Wang's warning. When he returned to his world, he would likely lose all the powers inherited from them. Confused, Irun had asked why. The Demon King explained that his powers were far too overwhelming for his world to handle, especially now that chaos resided within him. Irun asked if it meant he had to undergo the same training again. Mu Wang calls him, asking him what he planned to do and reminding him that his body would need to be remade to contain his powers. Back in the present, Irun slapped his forehead at the thought of the ordeal ahead. His supervisor, now enraged, charged at him, vowing to kill him. Irun dodged the attack effortlessly, catching the man's fist with his bare hand. His supervisor, Cheol Taimin, who had tormented him for 5 years, struggled in disbelief. Taimin was only level 5, but even with Irun's reset body, he shouldn't have struggled. Irun pushed himself, remembering Mu Wang's words. Even a lowly warrior could overpower someone stronger if they mastered the art of killing intent. Mu Wang added that after all, killing intent is mental strength, surprising Irun as he began to understand it. Irun stared into Taimin's eyes, channeling his mental strength, which filled Taimin with sheer horror. With a chilling tone and murderous intent, Irun told him that he will tear him apart. The oppressive killing intent caused Taimin to imagine his arm being crushed as Irun tightened his grip. Taimin screamed in terror, watching his hand twisted. Raising his hand and aiming it at Taimin, Irun declared coldly that he will rip him to pieces. With a sharp gesture, he launched his hand forward, unleashing a terrifying projection of murderous intent. In Taimin's mind, the attack pierced through his body, leaving him screaming in pure fear, causing him to drop to the floor. The commotion drew the attention of the other slaves. Irun understood that clumsy violence could provoke resistance, but fear, true, bone-deep fear, was a far more powerful tool. He swore to himself that from now on, whenever Taemin looked into his eyes, he would wet himself in terror. Walking past the other slaves, Irun knew he had to act quickly before the Volcano Guild's guards discovered him. Reaching for the chain, one of the slaves asked worriedly, "Where he think he is going?" Irun ignored the question, snapped the chain effortlessly, and turned his gaze toward the monster corpse disposal area. The pit below was filled with toxic fumes from the rotting monster corpses, fumes so noxious that even the administrators avoided going near them. Yet Irun knew the true hell lay deep within that place. It was a hell he would willingly descend into, for it was where he would be reborn. Without hesitation, he jumped down into the pit, leaving the other slaves stunned and speechless. As he descended, the toxic fumes stung his skin and lungs, but he pressed on. Reaching the corpses, he pushed them aside, making his way deeper. Beneath the layers of decaying flesh and bone, he found what he was looking for: the boiling monster blood. This gruesome pool was the perfect training ground for the blood demon technique. He remembered Mu Wang explaining that there were various martial arts and secret techniques, such as the volcano's divine technique. Mu Wang had also told him that the blood demon technique he would learn was at least 5 times greater than those techniques, because it was the strongest martial art. Mu Wang had further explained that its principle was simple: stealing what belongs to others and making it his. The target, Mu Wang had revealed, was blood, which had surprised him at the time. Now, he understood that the blood demon technique was a vicious form of dark magic that absorbed the life force embedded in blood to cultivate inner power. However, to use this technique, he needed to create a dantian within himself. The dantian, a source of power for the warriors of the Silver World, was similar to the magic core of the players. Yet, creating a dantian was said to be impossible for those not from the Silver World. Mu Wang, however, had assured him there was a way, insisting that it didn't matter if it took dozens or even hundreds of deaths. He had simply needed to keep learning and persisting until it worked. Following the transmission method that his 3 masters had devised over 3,000 years, he had endured 1,000 deaths. In the end, he succeeded in creating a dantian and clearly remembered every step of the process. He began the first step, absorbing blood and circulating its energy. The second step was to create the blood dantian. He focused intently, starting to form a blood core inside his body and activating the blood demon absorption technique. The process caused unbearable pain, unlike anything he had ever experienced. Without question, the pain felt as though it belonged to another world, but he pushed through it, screaming in agony throughout the ordeal. His cries echoed through the area, catching the attention of the monsters lurking within the volcano. He understood why access to the monster corpse disposal area was prohibited. It wasn't only because of the toxic fumes emitted by the decomposing monster corpses, but also due to the deformed monsters created by the death energy radiating from the bodies. The area was, in essence, a den of undead creatures. After successfully forming his dantian, an undead goblin crept closer and launched a sharp claw attack from behind. He easily stopped the attack by grabbing its head. Observing the creature, he recognized it as a goblin zombie and knew that each undead attack carried toxic poison. Furthermore, he understood that these creatures were immortal unless their necks were severed. If he had been in his old body, he would have already fallen prey to them. Now, however, he effortlessly crushed the goblin's head with his bare hand. He regarded it as pathetic before using the blood demon absorption technique to consume its blood, then slamming its corpse into the ground. As he absorbed the goblin's blood, he felt truly alive for the first time in years. More zombies rushed toward him, but he remained calm, recalling the principles of the realm of crimson blood. In this realm, he knew he must absorb his opponent's blood, turning their nutrients and energy into his own. Another benefit of crimson blood came to mind. It collected the residue of blood and iron to create steel balls. He shot a drop of blood at one of the approaching zombies, causing its head to explode on impact. He resolved to devour every last one of the undead, without leaving a trace. Forming more steel balls, he shot them with precision at the swarm. Each steel ball struck its target's head, which promptly exploded into dust. Dashing into the midst of the swarm, he jumped and grabbed a zombie by its head, crushing it with ease. Releasing more steel balls into the air, he easily decimated the zombies, causing another cascade of explosions. Grabbing a nearby zombie by its neck, he released more steel balls, knowing that in the end, these creatures were nothing more than prey. With a final burst of steel balls thrown in all directions, he decimated the remaining zombies around him. The undead fell to the ground in lifeless heaps. Standing amidst the corpses, he sighed in relief. Looking at his hand, he thought that things weren't going badly so far. As he continued to absorb the zombie's blood, he suddenly sensed a presence behind him. He turned quickly and saw a massive figure swinging its enormous arm at him. He managed to jump away just in time, landing at a safe distance. When he looked closer, he recognized the figure as a zombie troll. Despite the danger, he smiled. This was exactly the level of challenge he had been expecting. The next day, Taiman was crying and shaking in a corner, muttering that he was going to die and begging for someone to save him. Irun's traitorous best friend, Kim Shin Hong, thought that Taiman had completely broken down. An elite guard approached Shin Hong, addressing him as commander, and reported that he had summoned the other guards who were present during the incident. Shin Hong stepped closer to the guards and ordered them to explain what had happened to Taimin. One of the guards hesitantly reported that Taimin was training a slave who had been dozing off when, suddenly, the slave grabbed Taimin's hand, and then Taimin became like this. Shin Hong asked if that was all, or if there were any other unusual details. The guard stuttered, adding that the slave had glared at Taimin. This detail irritated Shin Hong as he wondered if it could have been killing intent, though he dismissed the idea as impossible, unless the slave was a martial artist with inner power. Shin Hong then demanded to know the slave's whereabouts, which shocked the guards. The same guard nervously replied that the slave had committed suicide. Skeptical, Shin Hong asked where the body was, and the guard explained that the suicide occurred in the corpse disposal area, so the body must have melted away due to the poison there. This explanation enraged Shin Hong. Grabbing the guard by the face, he furiously questioned whether the guard was lying to avoid searching for the body in the toxic disposal area. He reminded the guard why he was stationed there in the first place, to handle situations where incompetent guards were attacked by slaves, and accused them of not caring if trash like them died. Shin Hong continued, adding that he had felt the slave's imprint being destroyed naturally, yet they fabricated the suicide report without even confirming the body. He asked the guard if there was any reason he should let him live. The guard, crying and writhing in pain, stammered an apology, but Shin Hong mercilessly crushed the guard's skull. The other guards stood frozen in shock, unable to move out of fear. Shin Hong turned to them and demanded they choose. Would they end up like the man he had just killed, or would they go find the slave's body in the disposal area? Terrified, the guards immediately replied that they would search for it. Furious, Shin Hong ordered them to hurry, and they rushed toward the disposal area to begin their search. Calmly, he told his elite subordinates that those useless guards would likely die from the poison before finding the body. Once they returned, he planned to inspect their equipment and then enter the corpse disposal area himself. His subordinates acknowledged his orders, and Shin Hong, still irritated, thought to himself that Irun had managed to vex him even until the end. 2 weeks later, Irun was still deep within the disposal area, killing zombies and absorbing their blood. He realized he had nearly absorbed all the corpses and zombie monsters in the area. With this, he had reached the second stage of the blood demon absorption technique, self-blood. He noticed a tremendous poison leaking from a gap nearby and concluded that it must be coming from that direction. Shooting one of his newly created steel balls toward the source of the leak, it struck the wall, shattering the structure. He reflected on the power of the self-blood technique, which focused on the concentration and explosive release of energy. The self-blood stage provided several times more resistance to poison than the earlier blood essence stage. Without reaching this stage, he knew his body would have already melted away from the toxic environment. Despite his progress, he was aware that his time there was limited. However, he was confident that the necessary preparations were complete, and he had come to this place for a specific reason. The purpose involved the transcendental species, monsters of the highest danger level, creatures that should never be faced. Among these species, the most renowned and noble were dragons. Once, a dragon had escaped through a gate. The serpent dragon, Algolas, was a resurrected dragon filled with rage. Many players risked their lives to face it, and miraculously, they succeeded in slaying the beast. Naturally, the world was thrown into chaos, and what garnered the most attention was the value of its corpse. Algolas's blood was the finest alchemical material, and its bones could be forged into unique grade weapons. However, the dragon was tainted with poison, rage, and magic. Merely touching its corpse could cause a person's body to melt away completely. To address this, Einhardt's technology created the corpse disposal area to naturally purify the dragon's remains and employed slaves to absorb the poison. He touched Agal's bone, swearing to the Volcano Guild that he would repay all the suffering they had inflicted on him, with interest. Without hesitation, he began to use the blood demon absorption technique on Algolas's remains. 100 years ago, Mu Wang had asked him about the dragon embryo, to which he had replied yes, explaining that he planned to absorb it upon his return. Mu Wang had agreed, knowing the dragon embryo would help him recover a significant portion of his power, but warned him it would likely hurt like hell. That warning proved to be 100% accurate, as the moment he began absorbing Algolis's embryo, a surge of immense power entered his body. The pain was so overwhelming that his mind nearly blacked out. He realized that without the rigorous training he had endured with his masters, he would have fainted on the spot. Despite the agony, he felt his internal energy rapidly building up in his blood circulation. Even though the dragon had been dead for a long time, its power remained extraordinarily potent. He coughed up blood but refused to back down. The pressure was insane, and he could feel that his blood circulation was already reaching its limit, even as he compressed his inner energy with the self-blood technique. He understood that stopping now would cause the internal energy to backfire and kill him, yet continuing risked his body exploding. This outcome had been one of his expected results, but he wondered if there was another way forward. He recalled the Demon King asking him what he would do if he couldn't absorb all the power. She had praised him for raising a very good question. She had explained that dragons were highly revered even in Gehenna, and, as he suspected, it might indeed be difficult for a human body to fully accept such power. However, the solution was simple. He needed to become a dragon. Confused, he had asked if that was even possible. She had been amused by his surprise, remarking that it was odd for him to doubt after having received all their essence. She had also reminded him that his goal was to reclaim the power he had once held. A dragon, she had said, was merely a step in his journey. This idea had sparked inspiration within him. Drawing upon the biological knowledge he had learned from the Demon King, Virgena, he had realized he could reconstruct his body and undergo another transformation. Convinced there was no such thing as impossible, especially for someone who had even absorbed chaos, he resolved to proceed. He resumed absorbing the dragon embryo while simultaneously transforming his body. The pain was excruciating, far worse than before. He remembered Mu Wang's words that transforming into a dragon embryo body was a powerful method. In the Silver World, those who possessed the body of a dragon were known by a special title. After hours of agony, he succeeded in consuming the dragon embryo. Algolis's bone disintegrated in the process. When he opened his eyes, they had transformed into dragon eyes, and his body radiated an intense dragon aura. He recalled Mu Wang telling him the name of this state. It was the dragon bone body. Meanwhile, Shin Hong and his team entered the disposal area, shocked by what they saw. All the corpses and poison had vanished. Shin Hong, aware that even a Guardian-level mana user couldn't achieve such a feat, felt a rising panic as he wondered what could have caused it. The thought of Algolis's corpse suddenly struck him, and he frantically wondered what had happened to it. He immediately ordered his elite guard to report to the guild that all the poison in the corpse disposal area had disappeared. The guard acknowledged the command and began running out of the area to deliver the message. Before the elite could make it far, a black ball came hurtling toward him. The man managed to bend just in time to avoid a direct hit, but the ball activated moments later, unleashing a force so intense that he was reduced to ashes. Shin Hong and his team barely had time to react before the explosion reached them. Acting quickly, Shin Hong pulled one of his teammates in front of him, using the unfortunate man as a shield to protect himself from the blast. The aftermath left Shin Hong shaken. He realized the situation was extremely dangerous and feared what might happen if more explosions occurred. If this continued, the entire corpse disposal area could be obliterated. At that moment, Irun appeared. Addressing Shin Hong, he remarked how Shin Hong, despite becoming the commander of the Volcano Guild's engineering unit, hadn't changed. He observed that Shin Hong still cowered behind others, out of fear. With a chilling tone, he called him traitor Kim Shin Hong. Shin Hong recognized him and furiously demanded to know how he was still alive and if he was really Irun. Irun replied that it was disappointing Shin Hong didn't recognize him just because he looked a little different, and asked if he was now willing to accept it. He added that he'd heard Shin Hong had sold him out and become the raid leader, but remarked that he seemed to have turned into more of a coward. Enraged, Shin Hong crushed his teammate's head, which turned to stone, and shouted at him to shut up. Shin Hong then ordered his team, the Black Hawk, to kill Irun immediately. Without hesitation, the Black Hawk followed his command. Irun knew that Black Hawk was a personal escort assigned to raid leaders, operating at a level above even the Wasen Guild. Their skill levels were typically above 90 by players' standards, making them experts on the verge of becoming rankers. Their hallmark skill was stealth, having been trained as assassins. While Irun acknowledged that invisibility was dangerous, it was not a threat to him. As one of the Black Hawks attempted a sneak attack from behind, Irun detected him immediately. The assassin froze in shock when Irun turned and released a black ball, knowing stealth only worked against normal players who couldn't sense internal energy. Irun threw the ball at the attacker, striking him in the face. The ball was a manifestation of the third level of the Blood Demon Divine Art, Black Blood. Specifically, it was a Black Blood Sphere, a technique that, upon contact, split like a shotgun blast, absorbed the opponent's internal energy and magic, and then exploded. Irun raised his hand and conjured several more Black Blood Spheres, crushing them into fragments and hurling them toward the other Black Hawk members. The shards struck their targets, killing them instantly as they erupted in violent explosions. Shinhong shielded his face and, horrified, wondered how Irun was able to use such a skill. Desperate for answers, he activated his system's information search ability. However, a sharp pain surged through his head as the system's interface turned red. Alarmed, Shinhong noticed that the words on the system had changed into something unfamiliar, something he had never seen before. As Shinhong struggled to comprehend what was happening, Irun approached him. Mockingly, Irun asked if he was correct in assuming that Shinhong was dying to know how he had gained such power. He teased Shinhong, suggesting that curiosity suited him since he never acted without first gathering sufficient information about his opponents. Irun remarked that this cautious nature was typical of him and referred to him as the guild's main tank. Shinhong, still furious, grabbed his sword and retorted that he was no longer the tank Kim Shinhong that Irun once knew in Dank, but was now the raid leader of the Hwasun Guild. He accused Irun of always acting superior, pretending to be righteous, and challenged him to see if he would behave the same way now, rushing in recklessly without caring about his teammates. Provoking him further, Shinhong invited Irun to go ahead and rampage as he pleased. Calmly, Irun responded that it was precisely what he intended to do. He aimed a black blood sphere at Shinhong and shot it. Shinhong used his sword to block the explosion. Though he managed to withstand the force, Irun suddenly appeared behind him and remarked how little Shinhong had changed, even as a raid leader. Irun released another black blood sphere, commenting that the Hwasun Guild would never properly nurture someone like Shinhong. Anticipating the attack, Shinhong activated his white shield, which blocked the sphere just in time. Shinhong swung his sword at Irun, shouting for him to shut up. Irun casually tilted his head back to avoid the strike, but Shinhong halted the swing mid-motion and forcefully brought the sword down, declaring it the end for Irun. In response, Irun released a black blood sphere beneath Shinhong's sword, deflecting it and sending it flying backward. The force of the impact pushed Shinhong away, but he managed to remain standing by bracing himself with his sword. Shinhong demanded to know how Irun had gained such power, shouting angrily that Irun had lost his player abilities and asking how such feats were possible. Irun simply retorted that knowing wouldn't do a cowardly traitor like Shinhong any good. Enraged, Shinhong rushed forward, thrusting his sword at Irun while shouting for him to die. Irun calmly raised his hand, reminding Shinhong that it was useless, and prepared to release another black sphere. Before he could, Shinhong activated his shield wall ability, creating walls around Irun and trapping him in the center. Shinhong reasoned that Irun had no other attack methods beyond the black spheres. If that were the case, blocking Irun's retreat and his spheres with the shield would render him powerless. Confident in his plan, Shinhong thrust his sword into the center of the shield and activated his Weapon Knight skill. The energy from the skill crawled along the sword, culminating in a powerful explosion within the enclosed shield. The blast shattered Shinhong's sword, but he felt certain that not even a top-ranked ranker could survive such an attack. Relieved, he called Irun a persistent bastard and assumed him to be dead. However, Shinhong's relief turned to shock as he saw Irun standing unscathed amidst the devastation. Panicking, Shinhong reached for his spare sword, demanding to know how Irun had survived. Before he could draw it, Irun appeared in front of him, grabbed Shinhong's face, and coldly told him it was too late. Dragging Shinhong to the ground, Irun seemed confused by how easy it was, wondering aloud if this was all Shinhong had to offer. Chaos, a being that thrives on the destruction of worlds, transcends time and space, wandering through dimensions in search of a vessel worthy of its power. The worlds upon which chaos descends are consumed as its nourishment, and ultimately meet their demise. For over 100 years, Irun had trained relentlessly to seal that chaos. After centuries of training with his masters, Irun had finally crossed the threshold and was prepared to become Chaos's vessel. Muwang remarked to the other kings that he had done all he could. The Demon King and Sword King agreed, adding that if this failed, there was nothing more they could do. Together, they watched Irun from a distance as he stared at the open portal, knowing that beyond its shimmering threshold, everything would be decided. Before he stepped through, Mu Wang called out to him, asking for his name. Irun turned, raising an eyebrow at the odd question. He asked Mu Wang if he was seriously asking for his name after over 100 years of training together. Mu Wang laughed, admitting that he had grown too accustomed to Irun's presence. He added that he had once been called the heartless ghost without blood or tears, yet even he seemed to have developed some attachment. Irun smiled faintly and replied that his name was Li Irun. Without hesitation, Irun turned back to the portal and stepped forward. The instant chaos entered his body, a searing pain overtook him, and he screamed in agony. His masters watched in concern until the Demon King caught him as he collapsed, telling him that he had succeeded. Mu Wang called his name worriedly, but Irun, exhausted, murmured that he felt sleepy. Mu Wang explained that this was the influence of chaos. His body was resisting its overwhelming power. The Sword King added that chaos was also gnawing at his spirit, warning that nightmares would now constantly plague him. Despite this, Irun forced himself to remain awake, stating that if he succumbed to the nightmares, chaos would awaken once more. He had anticipated this much. Determined, Irun stepped away from his masters, turning to face them with a solemn expression. He told them they had to kill him now. The three kings were stunned. Mu Wang was the first to understand, realizing that Irun had known all along. Irun proudly asked whose disciple they thought he was, stating that he understood their goal was to seal chaos within his body and annihilate it completely. He then asked if he was right in assuming their true objective was to destroy chaos entirely. The Sword King demanded to know why Irun had cooperated if he had known the truth. Irun admitted that he had been betrayed by everyone and left with nothing, unable to trust anyone. However, from them, his masters, he had felt a warmth he had long forgotten. He revealed that revenge no longer mattered to him. What drove him now was a desire to repay the kindness they had shown him. Before they acted, he made one final request: to know their real names. The three kings were silent for a moment before Mu Wang spoke, revealing his name as Shin Yon-wol. The Sword King followed, stating that his name was Sieghard von Damian. Lastly, the Demon King said her name was Virginia. Irun smiled, saying he now had no regrets. He shouted that he would gladly die there for his masters and closed his eyes, ready to accept his fate. The Sword King stepped forward and placed a hand on Irun's shoulder. Addressing him by name, the Sword King told him he would not die there. Surprised, Irun opened his eyes and asked what they meant. The Demon King gently explained that he was their disciple, their child, and Mu Wang added that they could never kill someone like him with their own hands. Irun reminded them that sparing him would mean abandoning their mission. Softly, the Demon King told him that they would share the burden of chaos within him and seal it together. Since the chaos inside him had been shaped by their teachings, their combined power would be enough to contain it. She explained that after this, the dimensional bindings would release, and Irun would return to where he belonged. Desperate, he asked what would happen to them. The Sword King replied that they would be sealed somewhere deep within the world. Before Irun could protest, they pushed him backward into the portal. As he reached for them, they told him to go and never come looking for them. Irun was curious about how far the power he had learned from his masters could take him. He had already sensed its immense potential. As someone who had once nearly reached the level of a high ranker, he wondered how his abilities would fare against others, not his masters, but humans. Yet, as he stared at Shin Hong, trapped in his hand, he found it all too easy. Shin Hong might not have been at the level of a high ranker, but he was still at least level 150 or higher. Irun thought that if he could acquire additional powers beyond the Blood Demon art, he would never lose, not to the leader of the Volcano Guild, nor the highest-ranking experts of the Silver Faction. He even imagined surpassing the powers of Einhart, Gehenna, and ultimately, the apex of that world. One hand. He had planned his revenge for over 100 years, but now that it was within his grasp, it felt underwhelming. Shin Hong stuttered his name, begging for his life. Desperate, Shin Hong explained that they had no choice but to betray him. Hearing this, Irun released his grip on Shin Hong and asked what he meant by no choice. Shin Hong, trembling, replied that otherwise, they all would have died. He claimed that to save their lives, and even Irun's, there was no other way. Irun, enraged, asked Shin Hong if he was trying to say he betrayed him to save him. He accused Shin Hong of becoming the raid captain of the Volcano Guild while he endured daily agony. He demanded to know if Shin Hong expected him to believe it was all for his sake. Aiming a black sphere at Shin Hong, Irun saw panic flood his former friend's face. Shin Hong stammered that he would tell him where the others were. This stunned Irun, who couldn't believe what he was hearing. Shin Hong, swearing to help Irun get his revenge if he spared his life. He coldly remarked that Shin Hong, who had already betrayed him once, was now speaking of betraying others. Grabbing Shin Hong's mouth, Irun told him that once he was dead, the others would hear of it. He instructed Shin Hong to wait for them in hell because they would be joining him soon. Without hesitation, Irun released a black sphere inside Shin Hong's mouth, causing his former teammate and best friend's head to explode into dust. A moment later, Irun emerged from the disposal area, effortlessly breaking the chains that locked it. The slaves and guards outside instinctively understood that the man who had broken free from the abyss had defeated the Blackhawks and Kim Shin Hong. He stared at the terrified slaves and thought that, if not for his masters, he might have ended up like them. Releasing several black spheres, he reasoned that if the slaves were left on their own, they would likely die anyway. He might as well end their suffering himself. The slaves and guards screamed in fear and ran, but the black spheres struck them with unerring precision before they could escape. One of the slaves fell to the ground, trembling and crying, stammering that he didn't want to die. However, the black sphere shattered the slave mark imprinted on his body, instead of killing him. Confused, the slave checked his body and realized he was still alive. The other slaves, worried, touched their own bodies and discovered that their slave marks had also disappeared. Lifting his hand to the ceiling, Irun released another blast, causing the cavern to start collapsing. The slaves, realizing what was happening, scrambled to escape. Before leaving, Irun told them they could choose for themselves, whether to die buried under the rubble or to escape alive. As the stones began to fall, he jumped from one to another, making his way out of the collapsing cavern. Standing outside Mujegyong at last, Irun reflected on how, when he first met his masters, all he had wanted was to destroy the world. However, after witnessing their sacrifice, he finally understood his true purpose. Turning around, he thought about the chaos that filled the world and resolved to consume it all, making the chaos his own. Later, the Volcano Guild arrived at Mujegyong. Chong In-woo, the leader of the Red Plum Raid from the Volcano Guild, found the situation absurd and said that he had heard the report, but he didn't think it could be true. In-woo thought to himself that everything started when they gave the raid leader position to some beggar from who knows where, turning the Volcano Guild into this mess. He then asked one of the men about the interrogation of the captured slaves. The man replied that the slaves didn't seem to remember anything at all, as if someone had interfered with their memories and erased them. In-woo asked if it was true that even the slave marks had been removed. The man confirmed this, explaining that there were traces of someone distorting the magic circle from within. This made In-woo conclude that it must have been someone at the level of a master. He asked if there were any other traces, but the man replied that no evidence of a martial artist or player had been found. It seemed to be the work of Einhardt's magicians or Gehenna's demons. In-woo surmised that it was probably Gehenna. After all, their true purpose must involve this. Suddenly, another man rushed over, calling out to In-woo, and reported that the corpse of the corpse dragon had disappeared. However, In-woo had expected this, knowing that if it was Gehenna, they likely had plenty of ways to use it without purifying it. He then ordered the second man to contact their headquarters and investigate every trace of Gehenna's activity on Earth, from the past year to the last month. The second man agreed and immediately rushed to headquarters. In-woo then noticed a headless body and asked the man what that trash was doing there. The man replied that Shin Hong had come to confirm the death of the slave, Lee Irun, which surprised In-woo. He thought that if it were Iraun, the one who was on the verge of becoming a high ranker, his name would have been well known by now if he hadn't touched that thing. In-woo asked about Iraun's corpse, and the man explained that about a month ago, when the slave mark broke, Irun entered the abyss. In-woo concluded that Irun must be dead, as his body wouldn't have been able to withstand the poison. He then ordered the man to wrap everything up there, as they would hunt down the remaining stragglers. The man respectfully agreed. Meanwhile, in the Dongdaemun district of Seoul, Irun entered one of the bars there. He overheard a man saying that it seemed the Volcano Guild's corpse disposal site had been attacked. This surprised the others, who asked who would be crazy enough to attack such a place. A woman responded that rumors said it was Gehenna's doing, and that it looked like they were after the corpse of the corpse dragon. She added that it seemed the truce was ending, which the others agreed with, knowing that Gehenna had interfered with the Volcano Guild. Irun realized that everyone was only talking about the Volcano Guild. Given that the guild was one of Korea's 3 great guilds, it was no surprise. He swore to himself that soon he would bring all the guilds down, but for now, they would have to wait. First, he needed to find his master Mu Wang's faction, which he believed was the most effective way to grow stronger. For someone like him with no official status, the bar was the only option to look for people. The bartender welcomed him and asked what he would like to order. He replied that he wanted Kahlua milk, but without the milk. strong and sweet with just ice. The bartender, confused, asked if he meant Kahlua milk without milk, adding that it wasn't even a real recipe. Another man overheard and told the bartender that he would handle it, suggesting the bartender organize the inventory in the storage room. The bartender agreed and left. Once the bartender was gone, the man turned to Irun and asked when they started using such an ancient code. He wondered if Irun had just returned from some gate 5 years later. Irun replied that it was more like 100 years later, further confusing the man, who then asked if he was some kind of demon. Irun denied it and asked the man if it even mattered when that bar was the kind of place for such things anyway. The head of the black market's Seoul branch, Jang Ho-seok, agreed with him and asked what he wanted. He simply replied that he wanted to take on a job. Ho-seok asked if he had any specific type in mind, and he replied that he was fine with anything, but the location should be a D-rank gate, or higher. Ho-seok opened the cabinet under the counter, telling him that he had just the right jobs for him. Ho-seok then grabbed some documents, placed them on the counter, and told him to take his pick. He looked at the jobs and noticed a kidnapping job. Ho-seok explained that the job involved luring beginners into leveling up, trapping them in a gate, and then demanding ransom from their parents. The targets were children of rich families, meaning the payout could be substantial. Ho-seok added that the job fee was 200 million, with a 30% commission. He organized the documents and told Ho-seok that he had brought him a trashy job. Ho-seok, confused by his reaction, slowly reached for the gun under the counter while asking what was wrong with him and whether he was there to take on a job or not. Ho-seok then aimed the gun at him and said that sometimes they got idiots who came there with misguided ideas of justice, trying to take the place down instead. Ho-seok asked if he had considered what would happen to those who depended on that place for jobs and who he thought their anger would turn to. He quietly stared at Ho-seok, who had his finger ready on the trigger. He told Ho-seok not to worry, explaining that his words meant he liked it, and suggested that Ho-seok tell the people behind him to lower their killing intent. Ho-seok smiled, realizing he had noticed them, and told him that he guessed he could trust him with the job. Ho-seok then handed him a walkie-talkie, saying he would contact him soon with the details and that he should prepare. He took the walkie-talkie, and Ho-seok suggested he have a drink while he was there, adding that the place wasn't just a bar in appearance. But he declined, explaining to Ho-seok that he was afraid it might become a problem. Ho-seok asked why did he drove there for, to which he replied that if he drank and fell asleep, everyone there would die. Ho-seok guessed he doesn't have a sense of humor and told him it wasn't mandatory, so he should suit himself. He turned to leave, telling Ho-seok that he was taking his leave. Ho-seok watched him walk out of the bar, thinking that he was a late bloomer with a middle school delusion complex, and that he would die soon enough at that rate. Days later, in Dasandong, Namyangju City, at a D-rank gate, a beginner waved at a man named Cheol-ho. Cheol-ho waved back at the beginner, An Min-hong, and informed his team that those beginners were the players joining as pieces this time. He added that they were like younger siblings to him, so they should take good care of them. The beginner players then bowed to their seniors as a sign of respect. Cheol-ho asked Min-hong how he felt about his first field operation. Min-hong awkwardly laughed and replied that he was a little nervous. Cheol-ho reassured them, saying there was no need to be nervous because their party members had been with him for over 3 years, which meant a D-rank gate was no big deal. Cheol-ho then pointed to the side and told the beginners that those people were wanderers, and Irun was with the wanderers group. Min-hong and his teammates were shocked upon hearing this, but one of the girls in Min-hong's group didn't express any surprise. Cheol-ho explained to Min-hong that the wanderers were martial artists, so he shouldn't worry, adding that those wanderers had been with him for over 3 years as well. This reassured Min-hong, who respectfully asked the wanderers to take care of them. Irun knew it was natural for them to feel nervous. Wanderers were notorious for doing things no better than Gehenna's demons, which was why, even in the black market, Ho-seok had introduced him as a wanderer. But he noticed that one of the beginner players didn't seem all that surprised, and guessed that he had already found what he's been looking for. Hours later, inside the D-rank dungeon, the group camped in an open space to rest. Min-hong thanked Cheol, saying his experience points had increased significantly. Cheol asked Min-hong how it felt and whether he was right about the ride on the bus being awesome. Min-hong agreed but asked Cheol if they would be able to hunt on their own tomorrow. One of the men told Cheol that they had come secretly, not telling their parents, because Cheol had said they'd gain real combat experience. Cheol reassured them not to worry, explaining that he had planned a route where they could hunt as safely as possible. He placed a hand on Min-hong's shoulder and, laughing, told him that the next day they would finally get to taste some action, so they should rest up properly for now. Min-hong agreed and told Cheol they trusted him. Min-hong and his team then entered the tent to rest. leaving Cheol and his teammates behind, creepily smiling to themselves as they thought about how the beginners still believed their lies. A moment later, Irun sat silently near the bonfire when the lady approached him. She asked if she could sit next to him, and he nodded in reply. The lady sat down and asked if he was a wanderer and if he was a martial artist, what level he was. She remarked that he hadn't really stepped in during the day's hunt. He replied by asking her if she knew it was rude to ask a martial artist about their level. Surprised, she explained that she was still a newbie player and didn't know. This made him notice that she didn't even pretend to be flustered, which he found telling. She then asked if she could know his name. He stared at her for a moment, and when she met his gaze, she felt fear and looked away. He finally replied that his name was Irun. She guessed that his name sounded familiar for some reason, but before she could dwell on it, another lady called out to her. The other woman, Yunha, reminded her that her watch was starting and told her to rest now. The lady agreed, stood up, and told Irun she would head off, adding that it was short, but she had enjoyed talking to him. Before entering the tent, Yuna glanced back at Irun, thinking he didn't seem like a bad person, but wondering about the odd feeling she had felt during their conversation. The next day, Cheol slashed a monster's neck, and one of his members informed him that it was almost time for the gate to close. Cheol told Min Hong that the gate was about to close, and if they didn't leave now, they wouldn't be able to exit until the boss was defeated. He added that it seemed they would have to aim for real action next time. Min Hong asked if they couldn't just accompany Cheol to the boss, pointing out that the boss should be an easy fight for him. Cheol admitted it was true, but expressed concern that they might get hurt. Min Hong insisted that he was a proper player too, and argued that if he ran away every time he was scared of getting hurt, he would never become stronger. Min Hong begged Cheol not to worry and urged him to let them face the boss together. Cheol asked if Min Hong was sure, and Min Hong confidently agreed, which made Cheol smile, thinking he had successfully hooked him. Cheol proudly told them that was the spirit of a player and suggested they test their mettle by facing those guys first, pointing to a group of orcs rushing toward them. Min Hong confidently agreed, shouting that he had been waiting for this. He and his team launched their attacks at the orcs while Cheol and one of his members exchanged a knowing nod. The system then showed that the gate was closing as Min Hong struggled to block the orcs' attack. Min Hong was pushed back and shouted that they were stronger than he had expected. He called out to Cheol for help, but Cheol shouted back that it was chaotic on his side too, so Min Hong would have to handle his side on his own. Panicking, Min Hong saw the orc swing its axe down at him. Desperately, he grabbed something from his bag, thinking he hadn't expected to need it. Min Hong tore the magic circle paper to activate Fire Strike, releasing a powerful burst of flames that burned the orc to death. Min Hong was still catching his breath when Cheol shouted over, asking if he was all right. Cheol approached, apologizing for not helping right away, explaining that the aggro was overwhelming. He added that Min Hong was lucky to have had such a high-tier scroll. Min Hong explained that his father had told him to use it only in extremely dangerous situations, as it was a one-time use item. Cheol asked if that meant Min Hong didn't have any more items like it. Min Hong confirmed this, saying it had been a very expensive item. Cheol then pulled out a scroll and aimed it at Min Hong, saying it was a relief. Confused, Min Hong asked what he meant. Suddenly, Cheol used the scroll to bind Min Hong. Trapped, Min Hong shouted, asking Cheol what he was doing. He was even more shocked to see that his teammates were also bound. Cheol creepily thanked Min Hong for falling into their trap. Laughing nervously, Min Hong told Cheol to stop joking around and untie him, but Cheol slapped him hard across the face. He sneered, asking if Min Hong thought it was all a joke, just because his parents were rich. He added that it seemed he needed to make Min Hong understand, so he suggested they start by cutting off one of his ears. Min Hong panicked and stammered, pleading for Cheol to wait. Cheol froze when he heard a slash and turned to see Yunha slaying one of his members. Shocked, Cheol barely managed to block her sword in time. He shouted, asking how she had broken the magic restraints. Yuna calmly released her sword aura and asked him what he thought she should do. Cheol realized she was a martial artist. She swung her sword at him with force, knocking him back. Yet Cheol figured out that her martial artist status was why the magic restraint hadn't worked on her, but he couldn't believe it. His information search skill had indicated she was a player. Yuna pointed out that Cheol didn't look like a second-rate D-rank player either, and asked if he was a first-rank C-rank. The Wanderer stepped forward, telling Cheol to step back, as martial artists should handle each other. The Wanderer approached Yunha and commented that, judging by her sword aura, she was at the pinnacle like him, and her spirit was impressive. However, he asked if she could take on all of them. They surrounded her. She observed that her opponents included a pinnacle martial artist and 3 C ranks, realizing the odds weren't in her favor. The Wanderer launched his sword at her, shouting that if she didn't attack first, he would make the first move. Fortunately, she managed to block in time and forcefully deflected his sword with her own. The Wanderer teasingly asked what she was doing and if she planned to stay on the defensive forever. Struggling to block his attacks, Yuna angrily pushed him back, shouting for him not to underestimate her. She launched forward, swinging her sword at him repeatedly. The Wanderer blocked all her attacks, but was surprised by her strength. However, Yunha was also surprised when another man appeared behind her, ready to punch her. She quickly jumped away to avoid his attack, frustrated to realize that handling just one pinnacle Wanderer was already difficult enough. Chiel shouted at Irun, asking what he was doing since he hadn't hunted monsters the entire time. Chiel told Irun that if he wanted to get paid, he should catch the woman already. Irun remained silent for a moment before casually walking toward Yunha. As he approached, Yunha cursed to herself, remembering that ever since yesterday, even meeting his gaze had felt intimidating. She wondered who the hell he really was. She felt a strong killing intent from him, a feeling she thought she recognized but couldn't believe. He stared at her in silence, recalling his master Mu Wang's words that he was the master of the divine demon cult. Irun had responded to Mu Wang that he had heard of the demon cult, but asked what the divine demon cult was. Mu Wang had replied that the roots of the demon cult lay in the divine demon cult. Irun had then asked Mu Wang if the demon cult wasn't the sworn enemy of all factions, known for disrupting and overthrowing the world. Mu Wang had asked him in return if that was how he saw him, to which Irun had clarified that wasn't what he meant. Mu Wang explained that after he left, the Martial Alliance had spread propaganda as they pleased, portraying the cult as evil. In truth, they were just simple and pitiful beings. Mu Wang had added that when Irun returned, he should take good care of them. Irun's thoughts returned to the present as he recognized that even if Yunha could fool others, she couldn't fool his eyes. Her power was undoubtedly rooted in demonic cultivation. He remembered a slave once telling him that remnants of the demon cult could be found in the black market, where they rescued kidnapped people and recruited them into their faith. The slave had confessed that he had been caught in human trafficking and ended up learning about it firsthand. At the time, Irun had dismissed it as nonsense, but now he realized how useful that information was. The Wanderer broke his thoughts, asking what he was staring at and whether he planned to attack. Irun responded by telling the Wanderer to shut up, shocking Chiol and prompting the Wanderer to ask what he had just said. Irun asked the Wanderer if he was deaf and repeated that his breath reeked, so he should shut up. Yunha was just as confused as Cheol. The Wanderer turned to Cheol and asked what was wrong with Irun. Cheol replied that he wasn't exactly sure, explaining that he had simply hired Irun from the black market to clean things up if the situation went south. The Wanderer then asked if that meant it wouldn't matter if he killed Irun. Without waiting for a response, the Wanderer slashed Irun, only to be shocked when his sword shattered upon impact with the black spheres in Irun's hand. The Wanderer couldn't believe his aura-imbued sword had been cut down so easily and realized that Irun was a master far beyond his level. The thought crossed his mind that could Irun be at the transcendent level. Chiel's teammate rushed forward, shouting in panic, asking what was wrong with Irun and ordering everyone to attack all at once. Irun calmly reminded them that the gate was closed, meaning killing everyone wouldn't matter anymore. The Wanderer tried to stop them, but Irun said it was too late and unleashed his black spheres, piercing their bodies. The spheres absorbed their internal energy as the Wanderer concluded that Irun was at least a supreme master. Moments later, the black spheres exploded, and Irun watched with a blank face as their bodies disappeared. He turned his gaze to Heol, who was stuttering in fear. Irun asked if Heol really had the leisure to focus on him alone. Heol froze, suddenly feeling Yunha behind him, but it was too late. Yunha swung her sword, decapitating Cheol in one strike. His head hit the ground with a dull thud, followed by his lifeless body. Irun stared at Yuna, who was catching her breath in exhaustion, and asked if it was his turn now. She sheathed her sword, replying that there was no way she could fight him, and she wasn't foolish enough to try, knowing she'd die. He reminded her that he had been part of Chiel's party just moments ago, but she countered by pointing out that he had wiped them all out himself. She told him not to pretend they were on the same side and guessed that he must have a goal. Whatever his goal was, she offered to help him, asking if he would spare her if she did. He asked her back, what if he wants her life? She was surprised but calmly replied that if he wanted her life, he would have taken it already. He realized she was sharp. Before they could speak further, a loud growl interrupted them. They turned to see a massive monster approaching. Irune calmly asked if it was the gate boss and reminded her that she said she'd help. He told her to handle the monster and get them out of there, confusing her further. Nonetheless, she replied, yes, and rushed to fight the boss. A moment later, they emerged from the dungeon. Min Hong collapsed to his knees, unable to believe they were outside. He and his team were shaking with fear but furious over Cheol's betrayal. Yunha told Min Hong that she guessed she had let Cheol off too easily. Recognizing her, Min Hong and his team thanked her for saving their lives. He then asked why she had hidden the fact that she was a martial artist and joined their newbie party. She pointed to a man in a suit and told Min Hong that he would explain. The man approached and told them to get in the car, promising to escort them home and explain on the way. They agreed and drove off with the man. Yuna turned back to Iraun and asked how she could help him now. Iraun replied that he wanted to ask her one thing first. She asked what it was, and he questioned whether she was from the Heavenly Sect or the Blood Sect. Shocked, she stammered, asking what he meant by that. He asked again if she wasn't a demon cult member and assured her he had no intention of reporting her to the Martial Alliance. Her expression hardened, and she furiously glared at him, asking if he was part of the cult. He noticed her sudden change in demeanor and asked if that meant she would allow him to act that way toward her if he were a cult member. She demanded he answer, repeatedly asking if he was part of the cult. He simply reminded her that he had asked first. Suddenly, men in suits surrounded him, swords aimed at his neck. He remained calm, telling her this was her last chance to answer. He asked her again if she was from the Heavenly Sect or the Blood Sect. The men couldn't believe the overwhelming pressure radiating from Irune, wondering if he was a monster. Yuna shouted that she was from the Blood Sect, shocking her men. She ordered them to put away their swords, explaining that Irune was her benefactor. The men hesitated, reminding her that he knew about their existence. Fearfully, she stared at them and explained that if Iraun wanted, killing all of them wouldn't even be a challenge, making any threats against him meaningless. Her men, trembling, finally put their swords down. She turned to Irune and said she had answered his question, so now it was his turn to answer hers. She asked again if he was a follower of the religion. Lowering his aura, he calmly replied that, for now, they could just say he was a follower. Yuna admitted she still didn't understand what her benefactor desired, but promised to help with anything. She asked if he would tell her his goal now, or if they should go together. He replied that he would accompany her. They entered a luxury van together. As they settled in, Yuna excused herself, explaining she needed some air. She then held her face, which stretched like silicone, and slowly removed it. Confused, Irune realized she was peeling off an infinite mask. After removing it, she took off the hair tie holding her hair, revealing an even more striking and enhanced beauty. He remarked that she was quite beautiful, and she thanked him, asking if he was showing his real face. He replied that it had changed a bit from before. She asked if Irune was his real name, and when he simply said yes, she was surprised. He added that it was now his turn to ask questions. Referring to her party members, like An Min Hong, he noted that they seemed clueless about her identity. He then asked if the promise to take them home was a lie. He added that, judging by her infinite mask worth billions and the limousine, it was clear money wasn't an issue for her. He asked if her real goal was recruiting followers for the cult. She admitted that he was correct, explaining that her original plan had been to build rapport and gradually recruit them, but Cheol had messed things up. Yawning, he remarked that rich kids must bring in incredible amounts of donations, and asked if that was how she had made her money so far. She responded that while they collected donations, they didn't demand absurd amounts like the associations did. Ultimately, what they wanted was a guild. She explained that joining the cult came with the condition of helping establish a guild, so it wasn't exactly a losing deal for players. He guessed that guilds were essential for players who couldn't progress without leveling up. She then turned the question back to him, asking what martial arts technique he had used at the gate. He noted how aggressive she was for jumping straight to identifying his technique. She explained that she had shared the cult's secret, so she deserved to know at least that much. He replied that he couldn't use his martial arts for now, shocking her. She found it hard to believe, considering he had destroyed a pinnacle martial artist's head. He calmly explained that it was like a version of Tanji Gong, asking if she even considered that martial arts. He then shifted the topic, asking what the cult was doing in Huxi. She asked if he meant the special commissions, and explained that they took commissions in Huxi to gain experience for their followers. He asked if that included things like kidnapping or murder. She shouted that their cult should not be lumped in with such scum, explaining that they only hunted red players or infamous rogues. He asked if recruiting followers was also a goal, She calmly replied that he was correct. Irun thought they weren't as bad as Muwang had described. In fact, the Hwasun Guild felt more like a villainous group to him. Yuna then hesitated before asking one last question. Was he the infamous comrade killer Irun? Her question triggered a strong reaction. Irun released an intense presence, and the entire limousine shook. She, along with the car, trembled in fear. She wondered why her body wouldn't move. Even though she was at the pinnacle herself, she felt that his presence was like that person. A demonic man, she remembered. He calmed himself after seeing her reaction, which allowed her to catch her breath. She peeked at him, wondering if his display was a warning. The limousine stopped, and he noted they had arrived. The driver opened the door, and he ordered Yunha to lead the way. They stepped out in front of the Ganga Group building, with S-rank chairman Kang Han Cheol standing at the forefront. Irun knew the corporation was massively influential across South Korea and Asia. He couldn't believe the Ganga building was the headquarters of the blood cult. Yuna asked if he would go in, and he asked if she would let him go if he said no. She replied that if he wanted to enter, he would go in regardless. He told her that even if he didn't, they would keep chasing him. Eventually, he would be hunted by both the Hwasun Guild and the blood cult, which shocked her, confirming in her mind that he truly was the Irun. He added that if he kidnapped her, perhaps the pursuit would lessen. Worried, she told him not to joke about such things, especially there, as bringing him there was a gamble for her too. Suddenly, a voice called him an insolent wretch. They turned to see Han Cheol rushing toward them in anger. Furiously, Han Cheol demanded to know if Irun had dared threaten the lady. Han Cheol dashed forward, shouting for Irun to prepare himself. Yuna called Han Cheol her grandfather and tried to stop him, but it was too late. Han Cheol launched a powerful punch at Irun, causing a loud explosion. However, Han Cheol was stunned to see Irun calmly block his punch with his bare hand. Irun asked in an unbothered tone if this was how the blood cult treated their benefactors. Later, they were inside the Ganga Group headquarters, seated in front of a table laden with delicious meals. Han Cheol, laughing, admitted that he had been mistaken and told Irun to eat his fill. Irun silently stared at the food, which Han Cheol noticed. He assured Irun not to worry, because the food wasn't poisoned. Irun smiled at the comment and began eating, explaining that poison didn't work on him and that it had simply been a long time since he'd had a proper meal. Han Cheol, cutting his steak, responded that if that was the case, Irun should eat as much as he wanted. As Han Cheol observed him, he recalled the information he'd gathered in a short time. According to reports, Irun was a so-called companion killer named Lee Irun, enslaved by the Volcano Guild and declared dead recently. However, Han Cheol noted that Irun's appearance was entirely different from what was reported. Even more curious was the energy Han Cheol had felt when Irun blocked his attack earlier. It was clearly internal power, not the strength of a typical player. This left Han Cheol wondering about Irun's true identity. While Han Cheol suspected that Irun's internal energy level wasn't higher than his own, he found Irun's relaxed attitude unnerving. Han Cheol finally spoke, acknowledging that Irun had come because Yunha owed him a favor and had promised to grant him a wish. He encouraged Irun to state what he wanted, assuring him that anything within his power would be granted, but only if Irun made one promise beforehand. Irun guessed that Han Cheol wanted him to join the blood sect. Han Cheol confirmed this, adding that Irun seemed to know a lot about their sect and asking how he'd come by that information. Han Cheol then mentioned that he'd never heard of the companion killer, Lee Irun, being a member of their sect. Hearing this, Irun grew angry and demanded to know if Han Cheol had been researching him. Han Cheol explained that he couldn't allow someone into the sect's base without knowing anything about them, a statement that heightened the tension in the room. Yuna felt the strain in the air between them. Han Cheol asked if Irun had heard about the sect while working at the Volcano Guild's monster disposal site. Irun replied, "Close." Han Cheol then inquired if Irun had asked about the Heavenly Sect and the Blood Sect, and, if so, which side he was on. Irun replied that, for now, he supposed they could say the Blood Sect. Han Cheol pressed him on what he meant by "for now," but Irun simply said he'd explain the details later. Han Cheol agreed to officially make Irun a sect member, but was surprised when Irun declared he had no intention of serving under Han Cheol. Instead, Irun suggested that Han Cheol should serve under him. Infuriated, Han Cheol called him arrogant. He released a powerful aura that shook the entire building and demanded if Irun realized what he was saying. Irun, unbothered, calmly replied, "Of course." When Una tried to intervene, Irun addressed Han Cheol directly, ordering him to hand over the position of Blood Demon. This enraged Han Cheol further. Slamming his fist on the table, he shattered it into pieces, but Irun remained seated and unfazed. Han Cheol warned him that he had crossed the line. When Eunha attempted to calm her grandfather, Han Cheol shouted at her to stay back, leaving her hesitant. He reminded her of the punishment for daring to speak of the blood demon's name and told her even she couldn't protect Irun. Realizing the situation was dire, Irun stood up and raised his hand. He knew that realistically, he was one level below Han Cheol. Although he had progressed quickly, his body couldn't yet use martial arts effectively. Han Cheol, noticing this, asked if Irun needed a weapon and offered to provide one. Irun declined, explaining that using a weapon would cause problems. This only frustrated Han Cheol further. He called Irun arrogant, questioning why he wouldn't even take a fighting stance. Irun reiterated calmly that he couldn't use martial arts, which pushed Han Cheol to his limit. Han Cheol's aura intensified, shattering the building's glass as he shouted, accusing Irun of mocking him. Irun, however, maintained his composure, insisting he was serious. Han Cheol declared that since Irun needed no preparation, he should attack. Out of consideration for Eunha, Han Cheol would give him 3 seconds. Irun asked if the blood sect was always this honorable. Han Cheol replied that they were treating him as a guest to be dealt with, not an enemy. Eunha pleaded with her grandfather to reconsider, but Han Cheol ordered her to step aside. Desperate, she turned to Irun and addressed him as an honored guest, urging him to retract his statement. Han Cheol, furious, demanded to know who Irun was to warrant such loyalty from Eunha. Even Eunha herself didn't fully understand why she was defending Irun. She instinctively felt that he was the one who could save the blood sect from its crisis. Irun, noticing this, revealed that Eunha was the priestess, an oracle serving the blood demon. Han Cheol finally launched his attack. As his fist neared Irun, Eunha tried to stop him, but it was too late. The resulting explosion shook the floor and could be heard outside. Eunha shielded herself from the blast, and when she looked up, was shocked to see her grandfather's flames disappearing. Realizing the flames hadn't simply vanished but were being absorbed, she and Han Cheol were stunned. Irun had absorbed Han Cheol's demon flame completely. Han Cheol, in disbelief, realized that the martial art Irun had used was unmistakably the blood demon art. Irun asked if Han Cheol now understood and ordered him to kneel. Overwhelmed, Han Cheol knelt immediately, followed by Eunha. Both bowed before Irun and greeted him as their master. Irun confirmed their submission, proclaiming himself the blood demon, the master of the blood sect. Han Cheol, sweating in fear, wondered how a player could know the blood demon arts. Irun then asked if Han Cheol could hand over the position of blood demon now, but Han Cheol remained silent. This prompted Irun to question why he wasn't answering. Stuttering, Han Cheol explained that it was because the current blood demon already ruled the blood sect, which surprised Irun. Irun asked if Han Cheol meant there was already a blood demon, to which Han Cheol replied affirmatively. Irun then questioned why Han Cheol had kneeled to him if there was already a blood demon. Han Cheol explained that the current blood demon's blood demon art was a less complete form than Irun's. Respectfully, Han Cheol added that while he couldn't fathom how Irun had mastered the blood demon art, it was considered the proof of the blood demon's identity and the symbol of the blood sect. Irun laughed, mocking Han Cheol's statement. He asked if Han Cheol truly believed the blood demon art was the proof of the blood demon's identity, calling it ridiculous. He then remarked that he now understood why the blood sect was in its current state. Han Cheol, confused, looked at him as Irun declared that the current blood demon was nothing more than a half-baked imposter. Harnessing the black power around him, Irun transformed it into sharp blades aimed directly at Han Cheol's head. He then asked Han Cheol about his position in the blood sect. Han Cheol replied that he was the left protector. Aware that someone of Han Cheol's rank would know such details, Irun withdrew his demon power and began explaining. He told Han Cheol that the true symbol of the blood demon was not the blood demon art. Absorbing all the demon power in the room, he revealed that it was the blood demon divine art. Han Cheol was shocked, realizing that Irun was the true blood demon. It no longer mattered how this had happened. There was no more concrete proof than the energy of the divine art. Both Han Cheol and Eunha bowed their heads even lower, shouting reverently, "Blood demon's grace, endless dark blessing." Irun, unimpressed, asked them what that was. Han Cheol explained that it was a traditional greeting dedicated to the blood demon, passed down in the blood sect. Irun scoffed, calling it cheesy, and ordered them to stop saying it. When Han Cheol hesitated, Irun firmly repeated the order, leaving no room for argument. Irun sat back down and asked Han Cheol to tell him about the current state of the blood sect, specifically what he needed to know to deal with the half-baked demon. Han Cheol reported that the sect was currently governed by 6 elders, as well as himself as the left protector and the right protector. However, he warned that the elders would not easily accept the emergence of a new blood demon, as the current one had ruled for over 10 years. Iroun asked what would happen if he simply killed all those who opposed him. Han Cheol responded that each elder had a specific role in managing the sect, such as investigating external affairs or expanding influence, so it was better to keep them alive as some might prove useful. Han Cheol then offered to personally meet the elders to gauge their intentions, should Iroun command it. Iroun agreed and ordered him to proceed, which Han Cheol acknowledged before leaving the room. After Han Cheol departed, Unha remained behind. She bowed her head and shouted, "Blood Demon's grace, endless dark blessing." This made Iroun shout in frustration, reminding her he had told them to stop saying that. The next morning in Namyangju, at Kang Han Chol's villa, guards patrolled the premises diligently. Inside, Yunha exhaled deeply to calm her nerves as she approached Iroun's room. Knocking on the door, she heard his voice permitting her to enter. She stepped inside, kneeling in her elegant dress to greet him. Iroun asked her what she was doing. Yunha explained that it was her morning greeting to the blood demon. He raised an eyebrow and asked if she had dressed up just for this. She replied that she had. Iroun then ordered her not to do it again, questioning why they were making such a fuss first thing in the morning. Yuna explained that as the priestess serving the blood demon, it was her duty. Iroun cut her off, stating that if he ordered her not to do it, she shouldn't. He then told her to go back to sleep. Surprised, she explained that the priestess must always wake earlier and sleep later than the blood demon. Iroun sighed and told her bluntly that he couldn't sleep. Shocked, Yuna exclaimed that such a thing was unbecoming. He replied seriously, insisting he wasn't joking. He literally couldn't sleep. He repeated that she should skip the formalities, ensure she got enough rest, and stop giving morning greetings. Still, Yunha persistently told him that she, too, would follow the blood demon in sleepless training. Iroun sighed and asked her why she wouldn't listen, reminding her that, as the blood demon, he commanded her to stop the morning greetings, weird formalities, and instead act as casually as they had at the gate. This shocked her even more. Stuttering, she replied, "Yes," prompting him to ask why she was glitching out. He quickly realized it must be overwhelming for her to accept that a player was now the blood demon. Yuna immediately denied being overwhelmed, but Iroun dismissed her response and told her the historical drama speech style was also forbidden. She replied that she understood, and he asked if saying "okay" or "I understand" was truly that difficult for her. Hesitant at first, she eventually managed to say, "Okay." He praised her for trying, and then asked if there had been any word from Han Cheol. She replied that she hadn't heard anything yet. Iroun stood up and remarked that, regardless of what happened, his role was already decided. Yuna asked what that role was, and he replied that he would take down the half-baked demon. He then asked if he was right in assuming she understood it was a world where the strong reigned supreme. If he proved to everyone that he was stronger than the half-baked blood demon, everything would fall into place. For that, he needed to train. He asked if there was a training hall in the villa and ordered her to lead the way. 100 years ago, Iroun had asked his master, Mu Wang, when he would teach him martial arts techniques. Mu Wang had replied that it was a good question and explained that the techniques Iroun would learn had been adjusted so that the three of them, his companions and him, could fully utilize their power. In other words, their individual learnings had been made to mesh seamlessly, like gears in a machine. Using abilities prematurely, before they were fully gained, or failing to completely acquire specific strengths, would hinder the use of subsequent powers. Just like forcing an incomplete gear to rotate would lead to a malfunction. Mu Wang had told him that before completing the Blood Demon Divine Art, he could not use any other weapons or arts. The Sword God had added that experiencing this limitation personally would help Iroun understand better. They ordered him to try swinging a sword. Iroun had taken the sword and swung it clumsily, only to accidentally slash himself, screaming in pain. Back in the present, Iroun was in the villa's training room, controlling his aura and power. He thought to himself that he never wanted to experience the pain of slashing himself again. He would rather endure a full body transformation 10 times over. Still, thanks to the dragon's blood flowing through him, he had reached the final stage of the black blood. However, it was incomplete, as the blood had not yet been fully absorbed. Nevertheless, the dragon's blood coursed through his entire body. He drew some blood out of his body, knowing that he needed to discard all unnecessary vitality so that only pure strength would remain. A powerful black blood and dark energy flowed out of him, radiating intense strength. A week later, Yuna knelt in front of the training room door, thinking to herself that it had been an entire week. She wondered what in the world Irun was doing. In her opinion, it shouldn't have been possible for Irun to train in the blood demon art in an empty training hall like this. Suddenly the door creaked open, and she gasped in shock. Irun emerged, his body now perfectly strong and radiating immense power. Irun looked down at his hands, a satisfied expression on his face. He had finally entered the final stage of the blood demon divine art. A moment later, Irun was mixing his bibimbap and eating it while Yunha sat beside him, staring at him intently. Noticing her gaze, he asked if she wanted some, but she remained silent, lost in thought. She marveled at how he had progressed so much in just a week. It was hard to believe, knowing that without pure blood and a special ritual, mastering the blood demon art was supposed to be impossible. She wondered how he had achieved this in an empty training hall. She snapped out of her thoughts when he asked if she was going to eat or not. Startled, she immediately bowed and stuttered that she would prepare the food herself next time. He told her there was no need, as he had simply thrown everything together and mixed it, reiterating that he was asking if she wanted to eat. Turning to his side, he addressed the invisible men around them, telling them he had no intention of being guarded by those weaker than him. He ordered them to drop their stealth and join him to eat. Yuna was shocked. She realized that he had noticed the Shadow Blood Squad, an elite group of guards painstakingly trained by the elders. Their stealth skills were said to rival the famed Ghostly Melody assassins of Yoon. She couldn't fathom how he had detected them so casually. Watching him call out the men and order them to hurry up and eat, she wondered at his extraordinary perception. Later, Irun returned to the training room to continue refining the blood demon divine art. He noted that true blood felt powerful, and with the black dragon's blood almost fully absorbed, he knew he needed to refine the black blood into true blood. This would perfect the purity of the true blood circulating through his blood core. After finishing his session, he left the training room, reflecting that the only thing he lacked now was time. To shorten that, he needed to seize control of the blood sect. Yuna greeted him, announcing that the meal was ready. He glanced at the dish and saw that the bibimbap was unusually orange. He commented that he thought he had told her he would handle his meals himself. She replied that she couldn't let him personally prepare food while she was there. He asked if she had added too much chili, which shocked her. She thought it made the dish taste better. Suddenly, she knelt down and shouted that she had committed a grave sin and would pay with her life. Exasperated, he shouted back, reminding her to stop doing that. Suddenly, Irun felt something unusual. He immediately looked outside the window, silent and alert. Yuna noticed his reaction and asked what was wrong. He simply replied, "They have guests." Outside the villa, the guards confronted the guest, shouting that they could not enter. The elder among them demanded to know what they meant by that. The third elder, a cold-blooded Taoist named Han Dobek, asked if the guards didn't know who he was. One of the guards replied that they recognized him. Dobek, annoyed, asked if they still refused to step aside despite knowing who he was. Releasing a strong, icy aura, he demanded an explanation. The guard responded that Left Protector Han Cheol had ordered that no one could pass without permission. Dobek swung his sword forward, releasing a sharp wave of cold ice, and stated that he knew it wasn't their fault. Out of mercy, he offered them a final warning. Pointing his sword at the guards, he ordered them to step aside, declaring he would overlook their offense if they obeyed. A cold-blooded tiger spirit loomed behind Dobek, adding to his intimidation. The guards hesitated but ultimately drew their swords, apologizing as they stood their ground. Dobek dashed forward with his sword, praising the guards for their proper attitude as followers of the blood sect. The lead guard was stunned, realizing Dobek had appeared in front of him in an instant. Dobek swung his sword, aiming for the guard, but stopped when Yunha shouted his name. He looked up to see her standing between him and the guards. Dobek loudly asked Yunha what she was doing, calling her behavior reckless. She shouted back, demanding to know what he was doing there, reminding him that Han Cheol had not granted permission for his visit. Dobek, remaining calm, called her by name and asked if she truly didn't understand Han Cheol's plot. He then shouted that Han Cheol was committing treason by dividing the blood sect they had barely managed to unify. Dobek asked how he could stand by and allow this. Yuna firmly explained that the blood demon was someone she, as the priestess, had chosen, and asked if Dobek still doubted him. Dobek retorted by asking how a former player could master the blood demon art, leaving her momentarily speechless. Dobek continued, pointing out that throughout history, there had been imposters claiming to be the blood demon. He warned that Iraun could be a spy from the Celestial Clan. Even if Iraun was the real blood demon, Dobek stated, the law did not permit two suns under the same sky. At this rate, both she and Han Cheol would be charged with treason. To prevent further escalation, Dobek declared he would handle the matter himself. Pointing his sword at her, he told her to step aside, adding that he didn't want to lose her or Han Cheol. Yuna stood her ground, insisting that Han Cheol would never forgive such an act. Dobek responded that he had already made his decision, and, even if it put him at odds with Han Cheol or cost him his life, it was the least he could do for his friend. Dobek apologized to Yunha for his rudeness, but insisted she move aside. Before he could swing his sword, Han Cheol suddenly appeared, launching a furious punch that caused a strong explosion. Dobek, fortunately, managed to block it with his sword. Han Cheol addressed Dobek respectfully as Third Elder, before angrily switching to his real name. He demanded to know what Dobek thought he was doing. The elders with fire and ice magic powers stood face to face. Han Cheol, expecting this confrontation, wondered why things had escalated so quickly as he stared at his old friend. Dobek broke the silence, telling Han Cheol that the Volcano Guild was on the move, which shocked both Han Cheol and Yunha. Dobek added that the guild had found their trail. He then asked Han Cheol what he thought would happen if the existence of a new blood demon was announced now. Dobek warned that Han Cheol would be the first to be discarded, thrown to the enemies as bait. Han Cheol argued that the Volcano Guild had no reason not to oppose the blood demon. Dobek pressed him further, asking if he had considered the possibility that Eraun might be a spy. This enraged Han Cheol, who shouted that the suggestion was absurd. Releasing more of his power, Han Cheol forced Dobek to protect himself by blocking the fiery aura with his ice magic. Han Cheol angrily asked if Dobek was accusing him of failing to recognize true blood demon arts. Dobek, remaining composed, responded that Han Cheol knew as well as he did that the Heavenly Demon cult had spent ages researching the blood demon arts. Though unlikely, he argued, the cult could have achieved such mastery. Han Cheol shouted it was enough, but Dobek defiantly continued, declaring that even if Irun was the true blood demon, it changed nothing. Han Cheol was stunned. Dobek elaborated that causing division within the blood sect at such a time was suicidal. Killing Eraun, he argued, was the right choice. Dobek's words further fueled Han Cheol's anger. He warned Dobek that he had crossed a line he should never have crossed. Dobek gripped his sword tightly, positioning himself, and asked Han Cheol how he could stand idly by while throwing himself into the flames. The two prepared to clash. Han Cheol vowed to sever Dobek's limbs and begged the blood demon for forgiveness, but Dobek retorted that Han Cheol might as well kill him outright. Han Cheol leapt forward, launching a flaming fist at Dobek, who swung his sword in retaliation. Before their attacks could connect, Irun calmly ordered them to stop. Both elders froze in shock. Dobek suddenly felt an overwhelming presence behind him. Han Cheol immediately recognized the blood demon and bowed deeply, greeting Irun with utmost respect. Sweating, Dobek turned to see Irun and realized he hadn't even sensed his presence. Han Cheol shouted at Dobek to bow before the blood demon, but Dobek hesitated. He understood that if Irun had aimed for his neck, he would already be dead. Looking closely, Dobek noticed Irun's crimson hair and scarlet eyes, unmistakable proof of blood demon arts. At last, Dobek acknowledged Irun as the blood demon, sheathed his sword, and greeted him with deference. Irun told Han Cheol to stop prostrating, saying he didn't like it. He asked Han Cheol why he had been cutting off the limbs of his sect members when the blood sect was already crumbling. Han Cheol stuttered an apology. Turning to Dobek, who had stepped back in fear, Irun asked if Dobek had come to kill him, spare him if he met his standards, or kill him if he didn't. Dobek hesitated, seeing Irun's blood-colored eyes, but managed to reply that he had. He explained that the blood sect already served a blood demon, and the emergence of a new one would destabilize the sect, which was only now beginning to stabilize. Smiling, Irun praised Dobek for his courage, saying it was fitting for a senior elder. He asked Dobek for his verdict. Did Irun meet his standards? Dobek, still trembling, said proof was needed. Irun thought for a moment, then extracted a drop of his own blood, asking if it sufficed. Dobek stared at the floating drop, horrified by the overwhelming blood demon energy it radiated. Realizing the truth, Dobek immediately knelt, addressing Irun as the true blood demon. Dobek, overcome with guilt, grabbed his sword and declared that he would sever his right arm to atone for doubting the blood demon. As he raised the sword, Irun casually shot a blood bullet, knocking it away. Dobek's sword pierced the ground behind him as Irun reminded him that he had told them not to cut off their limbs, and that they never listened. A moment later, Yunha, Dobek, and Han Cheol were kneeling. Irun sat on the sofa, visibly frustrated, and told them to sit there instead. Han Cheol replied that they couldn't possibly sit on the same level as the blood demon. Iraun, exasperated, let them do as they pleased. Han Cheol studied Iraun closely, recalling the power he had felt earlier. In just over a week, Iraun had grown even stronger. Han Cheol asked if it was possible that Iraun had reached the transcendent stage. Iraun replied that he hadn't yet. Han Cheol optimistically noted that at this rate, Iraun would soon reach transcendence. Dobek, however, pointed out that the current blood demon had already reached the transcendent stage, as had the first elder, who was closest to him. Among the remaining elders, Dobek added, none would switch sides to support a new blood demon. Yuna interjected, saying there was only one solution. Since Iraun was progressing faster than expected, he needed to quickly reach transcendence and personally defeat the current blood demon. If he did so, even the elders would have no choice but to accept him as the new blood demon. Iraun asked how long it would take to reach transcendence, admitting he wasn't even sure he could achieve it. Yunha was taken aback. Iraun then asked if they thought the sect would simply sit back and wait. Turning to Dobek, he pointed out that by now, his existence must already be known to the blood sect, which explained why they were hurrying to act against him. Han Cheol slammed his head to the floor in a hard bow, shouting his apologies. He explained that he had thought the fourth elder might be open to switching sides, given his tendencies, but it turned out the fourth elder had already aligned himself with the current blood demon. Iraun told Han Cheol to stop groveling over trivial matters and declared that since things had come to this, they should act. He stood and told them it was time to take down the current blood demon. Passing through the gate transported them to an unknown land filled with monsters, while passing through a dungeon led to another world. The world first learned of the dungeon's existence when gate breaks occurred everywhere, threatening to destroy civilization. Humanity was saved by humans from another world, though superhuman players later began appearing among Earth's inhabitants. However, these players couldn't compare to the residents of invaded worlds who had fought mysterious beings for countless ages. In the end, the world endured their intervention. Yun controlled the Asian region, while Einhart dominated the Western territories. These forces divided the world, exercising their influence. Yun, which came to dominate most of South Korea's land, ensured that the blood sect concealed its entrance thoroughly from their watchful eyes. Iraun asked if the entrance was supposed to blend into existing structures, pointing to a door by the banks of the Bukhan River, and questioned if it had always been there. Yuna replied that she thought the blood demon's fortress door shouldn't look too ordinary, so she had added some flair. Iraun asked if she was even trying to hide it. Yuna confidently explained that reaching that location meant bypassing all of the blood sect's traps and magical barriers, so there was no longer any need to hide it. She proudly declared that among Yun's inhabitants, Iraun was the only one who had made it that far. Yuna then asked if this was his first time in Yun's world. To her surprise, Iraun replied that he had been there once before. Impressed, she told him she had expected nothing less, as he had been exceptional even as a player. Iraun cryptically replied that perhaps if he'd lived like everyone else, things wouldn't have turned out this way, leaving her confused. He told her not to mind it and ordered her to open the door, which she immediately did. Yuna placed her hand on the gate, releasing her demon power to unlock it. The group watched in silence as she worked. Eventually, she succeeded in opening the gate and welcomed him into the blood demon's fortress. Iraun stepped through and was shocked by the sight of the super poor, destroyed place. Disappointed, he remarked that although he'd heard things were in decline, he hadn't expected it to be this bad. Dobek lowered his head in embarrassment and Han Cheol apologized for the state of the fortress. Iraun turned to Yunha and asked what could possibly have caused such a state. Yunha explained that Yun's world was a fragment of a destroyed world. To sustain it, nourishment was required, resources like magic stones, from monsters, or gate cores. She began to elaborate on how the fortress was massive, even compared to other parts of Yun's world, but Iraun cut her off, pointing out that the sheer scale meant it consumed far more nourishment. He added that this explained the sect's desperation to recruit followers, which she sadly confirmed. Iraun asked why the Kangha Guild, being a large corporation, hadn't focused more on collecting magic stones. Han Cheol explained that drawing too much attention could endanger the sect. If a guild like Volcano discovered the blood demon's fortress entrance in its current state, it would be impossible to guarantee the future. Yuna added that while that was one reason, the elders had also prohibited hunting gate monsters. Iraun, incredulous, asked what kind of nonsense that was. Yuna explained that the elders claimed it violated the laws for the great blood demon's followers to hunt mere beasts. Frustrated, Iraun slapped his forehead, declaring that a thorough cleanup was in order. Turning to Dobek, He asked if Dobek agreed. Dobek immediately replied no, explaining that he had never supported such ideas and had even established a guild in the outer world to continue their activities. Suddenly, a man appeared and announced their arrival. The man introduced himself as the Blood Sword Captain, Jong Jisoo, and explained that his unit had been ordered to escort them to the Blood Demon's fortress. Yunha, suspicious, drew her sword and aimed it at the blood swords, asking if they intended to take them by force. Jisoo calmly replied that they were simply following the Blood Demon's orders. Han Cheol released his flames and demanded to know if they thought he would go willingly. Sighing, Jisoo unsheathed his sword, joined by his unit. Yuna, Han Cheol, and Dobek stood ready to fight, but Irun suddenly told them to stand down, surprising everyone. Yuna turned to him in shock, but he calmly explained that since the blood swords had come all that way to escort him, he might as well go. He walked forward and told the group not to be scared and to follow, leaving them confused but compliant. A moment later, they arrived at the Blood Demon's fortress, the Blood Throne Hall. Han Cheol's gaze fell on the fake lord, who was ending his seclusion training. Noticing that the fake lord was far stronger than before, Han Cheol grew wary. A man beside the fake lord accused Han Cheol of conspiring against the Blood Demon, asking how he, someone who served closest to the Blood Demon, could betray him. Han Cheol calmly replied that he merely sought the true Blood Demon, enraging the man and the other elders. The elders shouted that such claims were blasphemous, demanding to know what nonsense Han Cheol was spouting. The fake lord, unfazed, said it was fascinating and asked if there truly was another blood demon besides himself. The elders exchanged worried glances, but the fake lord declared that the timing was perfect. He admitted to hitting a wall in advancing his blood demon art, and revealed his intention to absorb Irun's power to ascend as the blood demon god. Han Cheol and Dobek were stunned, their shock mingled with fear. One elder stammered, praising the fake lord's wisdom and claiming that if he became the blood demon god, all problems would be solved. Irun, unfazed, dismissed the notion as nonsense, startling everyone in the hall. He then addressed the fake lord directly, telling him to stop spouting drivel and to come down so he could show him just how pathetic he truly was. The fake lord's calm demeanor shattered, and rage consumed him. The fake lord crushed the armrest of his throne in anger, releasing a powerful aura of true blood as he demanded to know what Irun had just said. One of the elders shouted in outrage, asking how dare he insult the blood demon. The elder then assured the fake lord that there was no need for him to intervene, as they could handle Irun themselves. The other elders agreed, rising to their feet and declaring that no one should challenge the blood demon without first going through them. The fake lord permitted it with a nod, and the elders stepped forward to confront Irun. Yunha, Dobek, and Han Cheol immediately moved to protect him, spreading out defensively. Han Cheol, however, couldn't believe the elders were resorting to teaming up. At least he thought, the first elder seemed to have no intention of joining in. A martial artist to his core, the first elder had always despised group attacks and trickery. This was a small relief, but the power gap was still far too great. Han Cheol knew the ideal strategy would have been to take down the elders one by one, and he wondered why Irun had willingly walked into such a situation. Irun noticed Yuna trembling in fear beside him, her sword at the ready. He told her not to be scared, which confused her. He assured her that he wouldn't die and asked her to stop worrying. She asked if he was claiming to be immortal. Irun replied that he wasn't exactly immortal, but he couldn't lose to those guys. He added that if he died, the world would perish. Until he found his masters, he had no intention of letting the world be destroyed. Still bewildered, Yuna asked what he was talking about. Irun explained that he had thought about it for 100 years, what he should do upon his return. At first, his answer had been revenge, but he realized he also owed a debt to his masters. His purpose now was to find everything his masters had left behind in the world and restore it. Once done, he vowed to place the entire world beneath his feet to ensure no one could take it away again. He fell silent for a moment, remembering Mu Wang's promise to grant him power. Smiling, he reflected that his masters were con artists, creating something precious for him to protect so he wouldn't destroy the world out of vengeance. Having made peace with their intentions, he decided to follow their plan. Turning to the elders, he called them half-wits and invited them to come at him. One elder inhaled deeply and spat ghost blood poison in his direction. Recognizing the danger, Han Cheol shouted for Irun to retreat. He rushed forward to grab him, but Dobek noticed and grabbed Han Cheol's coat from behind, throwing him back while angrily asking if he intended to throw his life away. Dobek then turned to Irun, realizing the poison was already too close. With no other choice, Dobek swung his sword, releasing a massive block of ice to shield Iran. The poison spread, but Dobek managed to protect that spot. The elder who attacked laughed, confident that his ghost blood poison was so lethal that even the blood demon would avoid it. Certain of Irun's demise, he glanced at the fake lord, hoping to leave a strong impression and secure the position of left guardian. Han Cheol collapsed to his knees in despair, unable to believe they had fallen so easily. He wondered if this was truly the end. Luna assured her grandfather that the blood demon was safe. When he asked how she could be so sure, she acknowledged that the poison was lethal even to those at the breakthrough stage. Moreover, Irun's accomplishments lagged behind the elders, and he was vastly outnumbered. Despite this, her instincts screamed at her to follow Irun, declaring him their true blood demon and the savior of the blood cult. Amid the toxic poison, Irun remained calm, walking forward unscathed. He asked if is that it, his voice carrying over the hall. The elders were stunned to hear him speak. He criticized them, saying it was no wonder the blood cult was falling apart. They were stagnant, blind to the outside world while hiding in the Blood King fortress. Pointing to the elder who attacked him, he called them stagnant fools and asked if they even knew what martial artists outside were like. He mocked their ignorance, claiming they were barely on par with a large guild. Even when Han Cheol or the priestess tried to inform them of the outside world, they had refused to listen. One elder, infuriated, urged the others not to listen to Irun and to attack all at once. The elders drew their weapons and slowly approached. They launched their special attacks together, but before they could strike, Irun asked them if they knew why the blood demon is worshipped as a god. The elders suddenly froze, unable to move. Irun stared at them, explaining that the blood demon was worshipped because they were absolute to the blood cult. The elders struggled, but couldn't move an inch. Irun acknowledged that it was good to see that blood techniques had been properly passed down over the years. Han Cheol and Yunha watched in awe as the elders were immobilized like statues. Irun turned to Han Cheol and asked him who needed to be spared. Han Cheol stammered, naming the Blood Sword Brigade, the first elder, and the sixth elder. With a flick of his finger, Irun executed the remaining elders, their heads exploding into pieces. The fake lord was horrified, seeing the elders slain with such ease. Irun turned to him and remarked that if he had mastered blood techniques, he shouldn't have been able to escape the influence of the blood demon divine arts. He asked the fake lord why his head was still intact and mockingly called him a fake blood demon, enraging the fake lord even further. Irun looked at the fake lord and asked if he was right in thinking that the fake lord had been mixed, a comment that pushed the fake lord to his limit. Enraged, the fake lord shouted in anger, gathering his blood into his hand and forming it into a sword. Yuna gasped, recognizing it as the blood demon sword art, but Irun remained calm, silently staring at him. The fake lord declared that this was the third form of the blood demon sword art. Raising his sword high, he swung it down, releasing a blood dragon that roared to life and lunged toward Irun. The dragon engulfed Irun, consuming him entirely, and Yuna screamed in horror. The fake lord shouted triumphantly, declaring that he would shred Irun into pieces and reduce him to a mere puddle of blood. But just as the fake lord mocked him, a light appeared inside the dragon's mouth. With a simple wave of his hand, Irun shattered the blood dragon into pieces, telling him he is full of crap. The fake lord stared in shock and asked him what he just said. Irun questioned if calls that the blood demon sword art. Irun went on to explain that his master had never created anything like it. The fake lord stuttered, shouting that it was nonsense, but Irun calmly continued. He clarified that his master had never paired the blood demon divine art with any sword art. The fake lord was incredulous, asking if Irun was implying that his master had created the blood demon divine art. He scoffed, calling it absurd nonsense, as the founder of the blood demon sect was said to have died thousands of years ago. Irun dismissed the fake lord's claim, suggesting that some fool had likely invented the technique midway and passed it down. This enraged the fake lord further, and he dashed forward, swinging his sword while shouting at Irun to stop spouting nonsense. The fake lord's blade came crashing down, but to his surprise, Irun blocked it with a palm-sized blood shield. Unbothered, Irun said he didn't care anymore, and launched blood needles at the fake lord. The fake lord jumped back in shock as the needles pierced his body. Smoke began to rise from the impact points, and he realized the needles were forged from blood demon energy. The fake lord muttered in disbelief, wondering how such needles could exist. He began to feel his blood draining and his inner power scattering. Refusing to yield, the fake lord released a surge of energy, burning away the needles embedded in his body. Yuna was stunned that he could deflect the attack. The fake lord shouted that Irun's abilities were nothing but illusions and tricks, claiming he had never heard of such techniques. He raised his blood sword, declaring himself the true blood demon. As the fake lord unleashed a massive display of power, Iron remained still, observing calmly. The fake lord unleashed the sixth form of the Blood Demon Sword art, Blood Dragon Rampage. Everyone watched in shock as the fake lord sent the rampaging blood dragon hurtling toward Irun, its fiery energy threatening to burn him alive. Iron decided to respond in kind, releasing blood from his body and calmly forming a smaller blood dragon. He sent it toward the blood dragon rampage. The fake lord laughed mockingly, calling Iron's blood dragon a pathetic worm and declaring him pitiful. As the rampaging blood dragon opened its mouth to devour Iron's dragon, Iron's creation allowed itself to be consumed. Inside the larger dragon, a powerful light suddenly erupted. The blood dragon rampage exploded, shattering into countless pieces. The room filled with smoke and dust as everyone shielded their eyes. When the haze cleared, Irun and the fake lord stood facing each other. But then the fake lord coughed up blood and collapsed to the ground in pain. The fake lord reflected in disbelief. He had felt the clash of their energies and was certain that Irun's level was at the extreme demon realm. Yet, despite being convinced his own level was higher, he had been overpowered. Irun asked the fake lord if he was correct in assuming that he was the youngest son of the blood cult, the brat who had suddenly appeared with the blood demon divine art and risen to become a promising heir. He expressed disbelief that people had actually elevated someone so incompetent to the position of cult leader. Irun added that the fake lord hadn't even mastered the blood arts. Then, Irun asked if the fake lord was connected to the celestial sect. The fake lord's reaction tells it all, and Irun smirked, saying that he was right. He declared that it was perfect, as he had many questions and would need the fake lord alive. The fake lord trembled with fury at Irun's words. His fists clenched tightly, and his energy erupted, cracking the ground beneath him. Grinding his teeth, he released an even stronger surge of demon power, transforming before their eyes. Shouting at Irun not to get cocky, the fake lord's body changed, revealing his ultimate form. Yuna stuttered in fear, and the others looked on in shock. She asked, her voice trembling, if the fake lord's new form could be the blood demon god. He told them it was impossible. It was reverse blood, a desperate final struggle. The fake lord then laughed loudly and shouted that he would absorb him and become the blood demon god. Yet, Irun calmly replied that if he could, he should give it a try. This infuriated the fake lord even more, and he dashed toward Irun, shouting at him to shut up. The fake lord attempted to grab Irun's neck with his sharp claws, but Irun stopped him by firmly holding his hands with both of his own. Irun asked the fake lord if he was correct in assuming that his plan was to overwhelm him with greater internal energy, calling him predictable. The fake lord shouted back, telling him not to be arrogant, boasting that his current energy surpassed even 2 hands combined. The fake lord activated his blood demon absorption technique, intending to absorb Irun's energy. He thought to himself that for over 20 years, he had been revered as the blood demon, having absorbed the blood of thousands, if not tens of thousands. He reasoned that while Irun had nullified all his previous attacks, he wouldn't be able to withstand the energy amplified by reverse blood. The fake lord smiled, convinced of his victory. Irun then asked calmly if the fake lord truly believed he couldn't withstand the amplified energy, shocking the fake lord. The fake lord wondered how Irun could speak so casually during such an intense energy battle that required complete focus. Irun explained that in a typical energy battle, the quantity of energy was critical, as it was a matter of overwhelming the opponent with sheer power. However, the blood demon absorption technique functioned differently, as it absorbed rather than burned energy. In such battles, he added, the crucial factor was not the amount of energy, but how it was handled. Irun told the fake lord he would show him the proper way. Releasing his demon energy, he tightly held the fake lord's hands. Veins began to bulge and become visible on Irun's skin. The fake lord was shocked when Irun started absorbing his energy, and he screamed in pain. Yuna and Hanchel watched in awe as the fake lord's once vibrant blood-red hair gradually turned white and his body thinned. Eventually, the fake lord collapsed. When he awoke, he found himself in a dark, unfamiliar place. He looked around in confusion but soon sensed a powerful presence behind him. Turning, he saw an immense blood demon power, unlike anything he had ever encountered. Stunned and trembling in fear, the fake lord watched as the figure approached. It was Irun, smiling. Irun asked if the fake lord had recognized it, and the fake lord, terrified and tearful, managed to nod. Overwhelmed, he recognized Irun as the Great One, the blood demon god, before collapsing again. Back in reality, Irun discarded the impurities from the absorbed blood, keeping only the essence. He gathered the refined power into his dantian. This perfect alignment of energy completed the blood demon divine art, marking the pinnacle of pure blood cultivation. His people were utterly shocked. Han Cheol, trembling, reflected on the gamble they had taken. He thought that the stagnant, decaying blood cult needed change, and even though their defeat was inevitable, their sacrifice might awaken the cult to a new era. Looking down at the fallen, half-blooded demon god, Han Cheol wondered who Hyul-Subek truly was, the first in generations to inherit and perfect the blood demon divine art. Yet even Beck had been defeated, unable to do anything. In his final moments, Beck had acknowledged the new blood demon and fallen. Han Cheol hesitated but eventually addressed Yunha, correcting himself by calling her priestess. He asked if she had foreseen this outcome. Smiling, she replied that the blood demon was the god of the blood cult. While Iraun walked forward toward the throne, she added that Iraun was a god capable of miracles and that she merely recognized the true blood demon. The elders, worried, looked up as the blood sword entered the hall. The people had gathered below, and Iraun gazed at them, remembering his master, Mu Wang. He thought it was pitiful. One of the elders stepped closer. It was the first elder. Han Cheol shouted in shock, wondering if the elder still couldn't accept the truth after witnessing the entire battle. The first elder exhaled and, to everyone's surprise, shouted, "Eternal reign to Iraun!" as a sign of acceptance. Han Cheol was stunned. He had never expected the first elder to bow to Iraun. The first elder knelt before him in respect, followed by the Bloodsword group, and then the citizens of the demon sect. All knelt to greet and welcome their new lord. Iraun thought to himself that they were like him, burned to ashes, having lost everything, dreaming of revenge. He guessed they had barely survived, longing for the arrival of a new blood demon. As the disciple of his masters, he felt it was his duty to answer that longing. Tears of blood fell from his eyes and began to spread in intricate patterns across his body. Han Cheol gasped, recognizing the transformation and confirming that Iraun was the lord they had so desperately yearned for. The god of the blood cult. The blood demon god. They all bowed deeply, laying their heads on the floor when they saw the image of the blood demon god emanating from him, repeatedly praising him. Slowly, he calmed himself and suppressed his blood demon god power. The first elder and the others continued to greet him out of respect, but he ordered them to stop. Descending from the throne, he remarked that he had expected this reaction. He then instructed them to stand, telling them he did not like such displays and that they should not do it again. The first elder explained that their doctrine decreed that when the true blood demon god appeared, they must lower themselves and pay reverence. Iraun turned to Yunha and asked, "What is doctrine?" She replied that it was the word delivered by the blood demon god for the blood cult to follow. In other words, what he now declared was doctrine. Iraun asked the first elder if he had heard that. "Who is not following the doctrine now?" he asked pointedly. Realizing his meaning, the elders stood immediately and assured him of their obedience. Suddenly, Bayek moved behind him, and Dobek instinctively reached for his sword to finish him off. However, Iraun told Dobek not to bother, as Bayek was as good as dead already. Looking at Bayek, Iraun thought to himself that he had completely broken down after encountering that thing. Iraun then declared that he was going to hunt the Cheon clan as well, prompting the first elder to ask what he meant. Iraun simply replied that he would show them. Raising two fingers, he aimed at Bayek's head. Bayek collapsed again, shocking the elders. With precision, Iraun controlled Bayek's body, forcing him upward. Bayek's fingers twisted unnaturally, breaking in multiple directions as veins bulged grotesquely from his skin. The elders were horrified, recognizing the reverse transformation technique. Dobek asked if they were seriously saying that no one had noticed the use of this technique until now. Han Cheol questioned whether even the former blood cult leader had failed to suspect anything. Iraun interjected, reminding them that Bayek was from the Cheon clan. When Han Cheol tried to explain further, Iraun cut him off, asking if he already knew about the martial arts that allowed Bayek to secretly alter his body, the heavenly demon technique. Han Cheol was shocked, recognizing the implications, but Iraun dismissed the topic, saying they would discuss it later. He then called Yunha, and she responded immediately. He asked her if the pool of 10,000 blood was still intact. Soon after, they descended into the basement, where Iraun felt a surge of energy that made his entire body feel purified. He knew that to someone outside the blood cult, the energy would feel like thick, oppressive, demonic energy. Yuna halted and informed him that they had arrived. She pointed at the pool of 10,000 blood, explaining that it was where the blood of all blood cultists was collected. As he approached the pool, she elaborated that the blood cult leader would traditionally drop their blood here to hold the blessing ceremony upon ascension. She asked if they should prepare ceremonial attire. He dismissed the idea, stating that he had not come for such formalities. When she protested, he asked her what she thought a god was. Stammering, she eventually replied that the blood demon god standing before her was the true god of their world. Iraun sighed in frustration and asked if she thought he wanted that answer. He explained that he was asking what normal people thought a god was, and what made someone a god. Yuna replied that a god was a transcendent being who fulfilled human desires and led them to a glorious life. Iraun nodded, agreeing, and asked why he should be called a god. He added that while he had punished others and defeated elders, such actions did not make him a god. Yuna argued that simply having control over the blood arts was enough. Iraun disagreed, saying she did not yet understand what it truly meant to be a god. Approaching the pool, he told her that no one had shown her the truth. Raising a finger above the pool, he told her to watch closely. He let a single drop of his blood fall into the pool. As the blood mixed with the pool's contents, the entire chamber began to shake violently, causing panic. Just as suddenly as it started, the shaking ceased, leaving everyone confused. Closing his eyes, Iraun felt the energy of every cultist within the Blood King's castle. He saw his people outside, waiting and hoping. When he opened his eyes, the blood in the pool swirled into a massive tornado. Yuna, shocked, exclaimed that she had never read about anything like this in the scriptures. Iraun replied that it was, of course, impossible in his master Mu Wang's time. Staring at the blood tornado, he recalled Mu Wang explaining that the blood demon divine art he was taught was slightly different from the original. When Iraun asked why, Mu Wang had replied that the Demon King claimed the blood demon divine art resembled the magic of a destroyed race from Gehenna. However, as it was a martial art created by the Demon King, it was meant to surpass the tricks of any extinct race. To verify the new power of the blood demon divine art, a force, an entirely new ability, was introduced. Knowing that the blood demon divine art was both martial art and magic, Iraun touched the blood tornado and declared that if a god could punish, they must also grant grace. Otherwise, they were no god. He clenched his palm, causing the tornado to explode. The resulting force spread throughout the chamber as the blood splattered and fell like rain. Yuna, looking up in disbelief, asked what was happening. Suddenly she collapsed from the overwhelming force, shocked to feel her body grow heavy. Iraun reassured her, saying that when she awoke, she would be different. She fell unconscious, overcome by dizziness. Outside, every cultist collapsed to the ground simultaneously. The next day, Han Cheol, with a bright face and rosy cheeks, approached him. He asked Han Cheol if it felt good, how it was, and if he felt rejuvenated. Han Cheol and the two elders nodded in response. They then knelt down and formally thanked him, making him sigh, and remind them again that he told them to stop doing that. He noticed that everyone had become younger and physically stronger, with red eyes symbolizing the blood demon divine art. He called Dobek over and ordered him to slice his finger and show his blood. Dobek immediately complied, slicing his finger, and they were all shocked to see that his blood was purple. He explained that it was called purple blood, which surprised and amazed Dobek. When he asked Dobek if he knew what it was, Dobek admitted he didn't, but said that after fainting and waking up, he could now use nearly twice as much internal energy. He explained that the effects would vary depending on their levels. Han Cheol and the first elder were likely at the stage of purple blood as well, but Yunha was at the next stage, black blood, which shocked her. She asked why she was at a higher level than the elders, who had greater martial achievements. He replied that it was probably because she was the priestess, and right now, her strength had been influenced by him. This, he added, was a new ability of the blood demon divine art. He then informed them that from now on, those who learn the blood arts and join the blood cult would gain power, but become bound to him in return. He stood and told Hanchel that he wanted to see how the cultists outside were doing. Hanchel responded that there was a place with a great view of everything. When he looked out, he saw his people healthier, brighter, and energetic. Hanchel noted that even the starving and sick residents of the Blood King's castle had regained their vitality. He agreed, but remarked that it would only last for a little while. He then asked Hancheol if it was true that they still lacked the funds to sustain them. Startled, Hancheol apologized and explained that the fault lay with the guardians and elders. However, he told Hancheol it wasn't his fault. The blame lay with Bayek and the dead elders. They would pay dearly for ruining what should have been his, even in death. He added that the elders could have let things fall apart moderately, and asked if it was true that they couldn't hold out even until the next month. Han Cheol sweating in fear, admitted they had already sold off shares in the Gangha group. The guild was on the brink of disbandment, and plans to clear a few gates had been postponed due to the blood demon's appearance. Sighing in frustration, he looked up at the sky and asked Mu Wang why he had left him with such people. Han Qiu then mentioned that the most urgent issue was the lack of elders, explaining that the first elder was in charge of the Blood Sword Palace, the second elder of the Blood Gold Palace, and each palace had its role, with an elder as its leader. With all the elders dead, there was no one left to fulfill those roles. He ordered Han Cheol to promote the deputy palace leaders, as they had learned under the elders, and should manage just fine. However, Han Cheol pointed out that the deputy palace leaders were also loyal to the elders, and suggested that those who failed to submit to the blood demon should be made examples through execution. He dismissed this, asking why they should reduce their already small numbers further. Surprised, Han Cheol argued that it was better to uproot rebellion early. He countered, asking if Han Cheol thought anyone could stand against him, and declared it irrelevant. He ordered Han Cheol to follow his instructions, which Han Cheol respectfully acknowledged. As Han Cheol was leaving, he stopped him and told him that he was to become the cult leader. Shocked, Han Cheol asked for confirmation, and he repeated that he was appointing him the blood cult leader. Han Cheol tried to resist, knowing the weight of the position. He explained that the cult leader wasn't the blood demon. It was just that no one capable of fulfilling the blood demon's role had appeared before. It was natural to separate the roles of god and leader. He added that even though the Ganga group was collapsing, Han Cheol had managed to sustain it for decades, and he cared deeply for the blood cult. This made him the right choice to lead, as he understood both the outside world and the Blood King's castle well. He looked at the first and third elders, who silently agreed. Calling Han Cheol, he formally announced that from that day forward, Han Cheol was the blood cult leader. Though stunned, Han Cheol composed himself, knelt, and accepted the promotion, swearing to deliver results worthy of the responsibility. He bent down, told Han Cheol he was already sounding like a proper cult leader, and then asked what his plans were, given the Blood King's castle had no source of income. This was the first fear Han Cheol felt as a leader. He looked to the two elders, asking if they had any ideas. They were shocked but remained silent. Fortunately, Yunhe appeared and suggested leaving it to her. She explained that while she didn't know the Blood King's castle, as well as Han Cheol's grandfather, she understood the outside world better than anyone in the blood cult. She had also been helping manage the Gangha group. She asked for a week to solve the urgent problems. Though skeptical, he knew she had managed a guild larger than his, so he agreed, giving her full authority to fix it. A week later, Yuna came to his room to report. He allowed her in and asked how it went. She replied that she had sold the shares and assets of the Gangha group, shocking him. He asked her to repeat what she just said. When she confirmed that she sold the shares and assets, he asked if it was really necessary. She replied that the Gangha group had already fulfilled its role. She explained that they had sealed off the entrance to the Blood King's castle and devised a way to maintain their identities. Since a significant portion of the shares had already been sold, continuing to grow the Gangha group would only benefit others, and over time, it would become harder to get a fair price for it. Thus, she liquidated it. Surprised by her explanation, he told her he had made the right choice in trusting her with the task and praised her, to which she expressed her gratitude. She also mentioned that she had disposed of the Gangha Guild and Nengho Guild as well. When he asked why she had even dissolved the guilds, she reminded him of the time Dobek had come to the villa and told him that their guild had been exposed to the Volcano Group. This jogged his memory about the Volcano Group, though he knew it wasn't the right time to confront them. The reason he had been able to take over the Blood King's castle so easily was the connection between the Blood Demon Divine Arts and the Blood Cultists. Fighting the Volcano Group now would risk destroying everything he had worked so hard to secure. She then suggested that it would be better to start a new guild. When he asked what she meant, she explained her plan to create a completely new guild with a fresh identity, starting from scratch. She acknowledged that, with so many established factions, it would be nearly impossible and reckless, but she argued that their blood cult wasn't what it used to be. He agreed that they had improved somewhat, but pointed out that they were still struggling just to survive. This caused her to collapse to the floor in frustration, asking if that was really the case. He explained that the blood cult lacked experience. Dealing with people and handling monsters in the gates were entirely different challenges. She agreed with him, feeling disheartened, but he reassured her not to worry too much, as they would gain experience and there was a way to grow stronger. When she asked what that way was, he replied that he would tell her in time. He then asked if she had decided on a guild name. She said yes, and told him she planned to name it King God General Emperor Majesty Iron Guild. He immediately ordered her to drop it and forget about it, which saddened her. He then told her the guild would be named Unha Guild. Shocked, she asked why it would carry her name. He simply replied that it was because she would be the guild leader. Her surprise grew, and she protested, insisting that he should be the leader. He told her that she was being foolish and asked if she had forgotten who he was. Since he couldn't operate on the surface, she was the best choice for guild leader. Her identity and face were still completely hidden. He added that the Volcano Guild likely hadn't given up on tracking him yet. Days later, in Namyangju, at a D-rank gate, zombies were launching forward to attack when a man managed to sever its fingers. As a giant zombie approached, he stabbed it in the chest and reported that the hunt was complete. However, the giant zombie came back to life, pulling the sword from its chest. Shocked, the man asked why it hadn't died when he stabbed its heart. Fortunately, Yunha appeared, moving at incredible speed, and slashed the giant zombie into pieces. She threw a holy enchantment to the man and told him that undead creatures wouldn't die unless weapons were coated with holy enchantment. The man caught it and responded that he understood. Another man reported to her that the area was cleared. She praised their good work and ordered them to begin. They placed their hands on the ground near the zombie corpses. As she watched, she remembered Irune teaching her the blood demon absorption art. She had been shocked at the time and asked how it was possible. He explained that it wouldn't have been feasible before, but now it was because they were connected to him. The cultists, who were also members of the Yunha Guild, successfully used the absorption technique to draw the blood from the zombies. Later, at the underground bar in Pier Dongdaemun, customers were talking about a guild in Namyangju that was making waves recently. One mentioned that they were called the Yunha Guild, and that rumors suggested they were successors of the Zhongjingyo. Others were discussing how Chiang and Wu from the Volcano Guild was mobilizing and wondered what was happening. Iraun walked to the counter where Ho-Seok noticed and recognized him. Pouring a drink, Ho-Seok commented that if this was about holding a grudge over their last request, they shouldn't get involved. He asked if Irune didn't understand that the nature of their work in a place like this often led to such situations. He then offered the drink to Irune, who took it and drank. Ho-Seok asked if Irune had joined the cult, noting that Black City maintained close ties with the Blood Cult. If he were a cultist, it probably wasn't a personal matter. Irune replied that it was true. Curious, Ho-Seok asked what brought him there. Irune responded that he was there for the Darknet's access rights. Ho-Seok told him he wouldn't have the authority to make that kind of request. Irune then threw a symbol mark onto the counter. Shocked, Ho-Seok recognized what it was and asked in disbelief if Irune was a Grand Elder. Irune asked if it wasn't obvious. Ho-Seok admitted he didn't understand how that could be, but added that such a request would require a hefty price. Irune calmly told Ho-Seok he had some information for him. Nervously, Ho-Seok asked what information he was referring to. Irune replied that the blood demon of this generation was being replaced.